One phone call could cost him everything: his career, his daughter's future, his late wife's legacy. But what this hospital administrator didn't know was that the quiet single father sitting across from her had already survived the worst day of his life. Losing his job? That was just another Tuesday. Welcome to a story about the moment one man's calm reply changed everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me tell you about Ethan Brooks and the night everything fell apart. The fluorescent lights in Mercy General's pediatric wing hummed their familiar electric lullaby at 2:47 a.m. Ethan Brooks stood at the nurse's station, his badge photo showing a younger version of himself, one who still smiled easily, one who hadn't yet learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, one whose wedding ring hadn't been transferred to a chain around his neck. His phone vibrated against the counter. "Daddy, I had a bad dream." Ethan's fingers moved instinctively toward the screen, then stopped. He glanced down the corridor where Margaret Winters, the new nursing supervisor, had her office. The light was still on. At nearly 3 in the morning, she was still there, watching, always watching. He typed quickly with one hand while checking vitals on the monitor with the other. "I'm here, sweetheart. Remember what we practiced? 5 deep breaths. I'll be home before you know it." "Mr. Brooks." The voice cut through the quiet like a scalpel through skin. Ethan didn't flinch. 3 years of single parenthood had taught him to hide his fear better than that. He finished typing, "Love you, Lilybug," and set the phone down slowly, deliberately, before turning to face Margaret Winters. She stood in the hallway like a sentinel, her gray suit still crisp despite the hour, her expression carved from the same granite as the hospital's foundation stones. In her hand, she held a tablet, its screen glowing with what Ethan already knew would be a list of his transgressions. "Miss Winters." He kept his voice level, professional. "Is everything all right?" "My office. Now." She didn't wait for a response, simply turned and walked away, her heels clicking a death march against the linoleum. Ethan glanced at his phone one more time. Lily had sent a heart emoji. 7 years old, and already she understood that sometimes her father's replies had to be brief. Sometimes love had to fit into the spaces between beeping monitors and medication rounds. Sometimes, "Mr. Brooks? I won't ask twice." He pocketed his phone and followed. Margaret's office smelled like industrial cleaning solution and old coffee. She gestured to the chair across from her desk without looking up, her fingers already dancing across her tablet screen. Ethan sat, noting the way she positioned herself. The desk as a barrier, the chair height giving her a subtle elevation advantage, the clock on the wall behind her forcing him to break eye contact to check the time. Everything calculated. Everything a power play. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. "I imagine you're about to tell me." Her eyes snapped up, searching his face for insubordination. Ethan kept his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that the best defense was simply refusing to engage in the game. "Your performance has become a concern," Margaret said, turning the tablet toward him. Multiple documented instances of personal phone usage during shifts, distracted behavior, divided attention. The screen showed a spreadsheet, dates, times, durations. Someone had been tracking him. 14 instances in the past 3 weeks alone, each one time-stamped and categorized, each one a moment when he'd chosen to be a father alongside being a nurse. "I see." Ethan leaned back slightly. "And which of my patients suffered due to these instances?" "That's not the point. It's entirely the point, Ms. Winters. Has there been a single complaint about my patient care? A single missed medication? A single delayed response?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "Hospital policy is clear about personal device usage during work hours. The policy doesn't make exceptions for," she gestured vaguely, "personal circumstances." "Personal circumstances." Ethan repeated the words slowly, tasting their inadequacy. "Is that what we're calling single parenthood now?" "I'm calling it a distraction from your professional responsibilities. This hospital cannot afford staff members who are more concerned with their home lives than with patient care." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not yet, but something harder. Recognition, perhaps. He'd known this was coming. From the day Margaret Winters had taken over as nursing supervisor 6 weeks ago, he'd seen it in the way she watched him, the way her lips pressed into a thin line whenever his phone buzzed, the way she seemed to view his parenting as a personal affront to her authority. "I need to be clear about something," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality that suggested she'd practiced this speech. "The hospital's insurance and liability concerns require us to maintain strict professional standards. Staff members who cannot commit fully to their shifts pose a risk, not just to patients, but to the entire facility." A risk? Ethan's voice remained quiet, but something in it made Margaret pause. "Ms. Winters, I've worked in this pediatric unit for 8 years. I've comforted children through procedures that would make grown men weep. I've held the hands of parents receiving the worst news of their lives. I've worked doubles when we were short-staffed, given up holidays, mentored new nurses, and maintained a patient satisfaction rating in the 98th percentile. And you're telling me I'm a risk because I check on my daughter? I'm telling you that effective immediately, you are on notice. One more instance of phone usage during shift hours, one more distraction, and we'll have no choice but to terminate your employment." She slid a document across the desk. "This is a formal written warning. You have until end of business Friday to sign and return it, acknowledging your understanding of hospital policy and your commitment to compliance." Ethan stared at the paper without touching it. The words blurred together. Whereas the employee has demonstrated failure to maintain professional standards, final opportunity to correct deficiencies. Legal language designed to protect the institution, to build a paper trail, to transform a father checking on his daughter into a liability that could be cleanly excised. "And if I don't sign? Then we'll consider it a resignation." Margaret folded her hands on the desk. "I'm trying to help you, Mr. Brooks. I understand you have a child to support. Surely you can see that maintaining this position requires certain sacrifices." The word sacrifices hung in the air between them. Ethan thought about Lily, probably still awake in their small apartment, probably trying to be brave, probably counting the hours until he came home. He thought about the mortgage payment due in a week, the car that needed new tires, the school supplies list that kept growing. He thought about his wife Sarah's last words in the hospital. "Promise me you'll take care of our girl. Promise me she'll always know she comes first." He'd promised, and he'd kept that promise for 3 years, through every impossible shift, every sleepless night, every moment when the world seemed determined to punish him for being both mother and father to a little girl who'd already lost too much. "I'll think about it," Ethan said, standing. The warning document remained on the desk between them, unsigned. "You have until Friday," Margaret repeated. "That's 3 days, Mr. Brooks. I suggest you use them to consider your priorities very carefully." Ethan walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Ms. Winters, can I ask you something? Do you have children?" For the first time, something flickered across Margaret's face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. "I don't see how that's relevant." "No," Ethan said softly. "I don't suppose you would." He left her office and returned to the nurse's station, where his phone waited with another message from Lily. "I did the breathing. I feel better. Sweet dreams, Daddy." Ethan allowed himself exactly 10 seconds to close his eyes and breathe. Then he checked on his patients. Little Marcus in room 308, who'd had surgery that morning, Emma in 312 fighting a respiratory infection, the new admission in 315 whose parents sat vigil by her bedside with hollow eyes that Ethan recognized from his own bathroom mirror. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of vital signs and medication rounds, gentle voices and steady hands. Ethan moved through it all with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew that falling apart was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not here, not now. When his replacement arrived at 7 a.m., Ethan gathered his things and walked out of Mercy General into a dawn that painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. His car sat in the far corner of the parking lot, right where he'd left it 14 hours earlier. The Daddy's Princess air freshener Lily had given him for Father's Day dangled from the rearview mirror, slightly faded now, but still smelling faintly of artificial strawberries. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the hospital building. Somewhere in there, Margaret Winters was probably finishing her own shift, probably congratulating herself on handling a difficult personnel situation, probably never considering that the risk she'd identified was a man trying to keep a promise to his dying wife. Ethan's phone buzzed. His mother-in-law confirming she'd take Lily to school. Then a reminder about parent-teacher conferences next week. Then a notification from the hospital portal. Your formal review has been scheduled for Monday, 9 a.m. Attendance is mandatory. Monday. 4 days away. 4 days to figure out how to save his career without abandoning his daughter. 4 days to somehow make Margaret Winters understand that he wasn't choosing between being a good nurse and a good father. He was both inseparably, and one made him better at the other. But as Ethan started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, he wasn't thinking about strategy or diplomacy. He was thinking about the look in Margaret's eyes when she'd said personal circumstances, the dismissive wave of her hand, the fundamental inability to see him as anything other than a problem to be solved. He was thinking about every other single parent trying to survive in a world that demanded they choose between their children and their livelihoods. He was thinking about Sarah, who'd been a nurse too, who'd understood the impossible mathematics of caring for others while caring for your own. But mostly, Ethan was thinking about Friday, 3 days away, and the decision he'd have to make. Sign the warning and accept that his role as a father was somehow shameful, something to be hidden and minimized. Or refuse and risk losing everything he'd built, everything he needed to provide for Lily. The morning traffic was light. Ethan made it home in 20 minutes, parking in front of the small 2-bedroom apartment that had been theirs since Lily was born. The Brooks nameplate next to the door was slightly crooked. He'd been meaning to fix it for months. Inside, Lily was eating cereal at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, her dark hair, Sarah's hair, tangled from sleep. His mother-in-law, Joan, sat across from her with a cup of coffee, and the look she gave Ethan told him she knew something was wrong. "Daddy!" Lily jumped up, spilling milk across the table in her enthusiasm. "You're home!" Ethan caught her mid-leap, swinging her up into his arms despite the exhaustion that made his muscles ache. "Hey there, Lilybug. Did you get back to sleep okay?" "Uh-huh. I did the breathing just like you taught me, 5 times. She held up her fingers to demonstrate. "And then I counted all the stars I could see from my window, and then I thought about the beach trip we're going to take this summer, and then I fell asleep and had a good dream instead." "That's my girl." Ethan set her down gently, ruffling her hair. "What was the good dream about?" "You were there. That's what made it good." The words hit him square in the chest. Ethan knelt down to Lily's eye level, taking her small hands in his. "I'm always there, sweetheart. Even when I'm at work, even when you can't see me, I'm always right here." He tapped her chest, right over her heart. "Okay?" "Okay." Lily nodded seriously, then her face brightened. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow? It's Saturday." "Absolutely. Now go brush your teeth. Grammy will take you to school today." Lily scampered off, leaving Ethan alone with Joan. His mother-in-law studied him with the same intense gaze her daughter had possessed, the one that saw through every defense, every careful wall. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Ethan sank into the chair Lily had vacated. "They're threatening to fire me. My supervisor. She thinks being a parent makes me a liability." Joan's coffee cup hit the table harder than necessary. "That's the most ridiculous—" "It is, but it's also legal. Hospital policy gives them a lot of latitude about personal device usage and professional standards." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "I have until Monday. Formal review. I either sign their warning and promise to stop prioritizing my personal life, or I'm out." "Can they do that? Surely there are protections. Single fathers aren't a protected class, Joan, and they're smart about it. They're not firing me for being a parent. They're firing me for checking my phone too often." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. 14 times in 3 weeks. That's their evidence. 14 times you made sure your daughter was safe." Joan's voice shook with anger. 14 times you were exactly the kind of father Sarah wanted you to be. The mention of Sarah's name settled over them like snow. Ethan looked at the refrigerator where Lily's drawings covered every inch of space. One showed their family, stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and me. Even though Lily had been only 4 when Sarah died, young enough that her memories were fading into impressions, feelings, photographs. "I don't know what to do," Ethan admitted. "If I sign, I'm agreeing that caring about Lily is wrong. But if I don't, How do I pay rent? How do I keep health insurance? How do I explain to a 7-year-old that daddy lost his job because he loved her too much? Joan reached across the table, gripping his hand. You'll figure it out. You always do. Do I? Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, I'm one supervisor's vendetta away from losing everything. And the worst part is, I can't even really blame her. She's just enforcing policy. She's just protecting the hospital. She's just doing her job. Her job should be protecting good nurses. And you're the best nurse that hospital has. That's not what matters, though, is it? What matters is liability and insurance and the bottom line. What matters is being able to point to a policy manual and say, see, we followed the rules. Lily's voice drifted from the bathroom, singing something off-key and enthusiastic. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. This was what he fought for. This was what made every impossible shift, every sleepless night, every moment of bone-deep exhaustion worth it. I have to get some sleep, he said finally. I'm back on tonight. Joan nodded. I'll get Lily to school. And Ethan, don't make any decisions yet. Sleep on it. You'll see things more clearly after some rest. But as Ethan lay in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling, sleep refused to come. His mind kept circling back to Margaret Winters' office, to the written warning waiting for his signature, to the impossible choice being forced upon him. He thought about the other nurses on his floor. Amanda, who had 3 kids and a husband who traveled for work. Carlos, whose mother had dementia and needed constant monitoring. Jennifer, who was in the middle of a custody battle and spent half her breaks on the phone with lawyers. All of them juggling impossible loads, all of them one emergency away from the same meeting Ethan had just endured. The pediatric wing was full of parents and children, sickness and fear and hope. Ethan had chosen that specialty deliberately after Sarah died because he understood in his bones what those families were going through. He knew what it was like to sit by a hospital bed and pray. He knew what it was like to trust strangers with your child's life. He knew what it was like to need someone who saw your kid not as a case number or a diagnosis, but as a whole person, a loved person, someone's entire world. That understanding made him a better nurse. He knew it did. His patient reviews reflected it. His colleagues knew it. Even the doctors who requested him specifically for difficult cases knew it. Everyone knew it except Margaret Winters, who seemed to view empathy as a weakness and parenting as an inconvenience. Ethan's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Carlos. Heard about the meeting. You okay? Word traveled fast in the hospital. Ethan typed back. Been better. Thanks for checking. We've got your back, man. Whatever you need. The simple solidarity made Ethan's throat tight. He set the phone aside and finally, mercifully, fell into a thin sleep punctuated by dreams of hospital corridors that stretched on forever, and warning documents that multiplied like cancer cells, and Lily's voice calling for him from somewhere he could never quite reach. When he woke, it was past noon. The apartment was quiet. Joan must have taken Lily somewhere after school. Ethan lay in bed, staring at the wedding photo on his dresser. Sarah smiled out at him, frozen in a moment before cancer, before loss, before he'd learned to be both parents at once. I don't know what you'd want me to do, he said to the photo. I don't know how to choose. But even as he said it, Ethan knew that wasn't quite true. He knew exactly what Sarah would say. She'd say that Lily came first, always. That a job was just a job, but being a father was forever. That they'd figure out the money, find another position, make it work somehow. The problem was, Sarah had never had to worry about being a single parent. She'd never had to face the reality of supporting a child alone, of navigating a world that seemed designed for 2-parent households, of trying to be enough when you were always, fundamentally, only half of what your child needed. Ethan got up and made himself eat something, though he tasted nothing. He showered and dressed in his scrubs, going through the motions with mechanical precision. Tonight was another shift. Tomorrow was another day closer to Monday's formal review. Time was counting down, and he still had no answer. He arrived at Mercy General just before 7 p.m. The evening light slanted through the windows, turning everything golden. Ethan signed in at the nurse's station, checking the patient board. Marcus had been discharged. Good news. Emma was improving. 2 new admissions, both routine. Ethan. Amanda appeared at his elbow, her voice low. Margaret's been asking about you. Wanted to know if you'd come in early. Did she say why? No, but she looked... Amanda hesitated. Intense. More than usual. Ethan nodded slowly. Thanks for the heads up. He busied himself with intake paperwork, vitals checks, medication preparation. The familiar rhythms of the shift settled over him like a well-worn coat. This was what he was good at. This was where he made a difference. In room 308, a new patient, a 5-year-old boy named Tyler, was crying softly while his mother tried unsuccessfully to comfort him. Ethan knocked gently on the door frame. "Hey there," he said, keeping his voice soft. "I'm Nurse Ethan. I hear we're having a tough evening." Tyler's mother looked exhausted. "He's scared of the IV. We've been trying for 20 minutes." Ethan crouched down next to Tyler's bed, getting on eye level with the frightened child. "You know what? IVS are pretty scary. I don't blame you one bit for being worried." Tyler sniffled, watching him warily. "Can I tell you a secret?" Ethan continued. "I have a daughter just a little bit older than you. Her name is Lily. And you know what she told me once? She said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared, but you do the thing anyway." "Really?" Tyler's voice was small. "Really? And you want to know what else? I bet you've already been brave today. You came to the hospital even though you didn't want to, right? That's brave. You're letting us help you even though it's scary. That's super brave. So I'll tell you what. How about we make this IV thing as not scary as we can? I'll explain everything before I do it, and you can squeeze your mom's hand as tight as you need to, and we'll take it slow. Does that sound okay?" Tyler considered, then nodded. It took 15 minutes, slow, patient, gentle, but Ethan got the IV in with minimal tears. Tyler's mother mouthed a silent thank you over her son's head, her eyes shining. This was why Ethan did this job. Not for the paycheck or the health insurance or the professional prestige. For moments like this when he could use his own pain and experience to ease someone else's fear. For the knowledge that his daughter had made him better at understanding frightened children, not worse. The shift wore on. Midnight came and went. Ethan checked his phone once, just once, to see a photo from Joan. Lily asleep in bed, clutching the stuffed elephant that had been Sarah's. No emergency. Just connection. Just love. He was putting the phone away when he felt eyes on him. Margaret Winters stood at the end of the corridor, tablet in hand, watching. Their gazes locked for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back to her office. And Ethan knew with absolute certainty that she'd just documented instance number 15. The rest of the night felt like moving through water. Every moment carried extra weight, extra significance. This could be one of his last shifts. Monday was now only 3 days away. Friday was tomorrow, the deadline for signing the written warning. When 7 a.m. came, Ethan gathered his things with particular care, memorizing details he'd taken for granted. The way sunlight fell through the east windows. The sound of the morning shift arriving, fresh and energetic. The particular squeak of the medication cart's left wheel that maintenance could never quite fix. He walked to his car through the air that felt too thick, too heavy, slid into the driver's seat, sat there, hands on the wheel, engine off, staring at nothing. His phone rang. Joan's number. "Lily woke up with a fever," she said without preamble. "It's not high, just 99.5. But she's saying her throat hurts and she doesn't feel good. I've given her children's Tylenol, but I thought you should know." "I'm coming home," Ethan said immediately. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Ethan, it's probably just a cold. I know, but I'm coming anyway." Because that was the thing that Margaret Winters would never understand. A fever of 99.5 probably was just a cold. Probably wasn't an emergency. Probably could wait until a more convenient time. But probably wasn't the same as certainly, and Lily was his entire world, and he'd lost Sarah to a probably nothing that turned into stage 4 cancer, and he would be damned if he'd ever again choose professional convenience over the people he loved. He drove home through morning traffic, walked into the apartment, found Lily curled on the couch with Joan reading to her. "Daddy!" Lily's voice was scratchy but delighted. "You came home early." "I sure did, Lilybug." Ethan sat beside her, pressing his palm to her forehead, warm but not alarming. Grammy says you don't feel so good. My throat is ouchy. Let's take a look. Ethan got a flashlight, checked her throat, red but not severely, no white patches. Palpated her lymph nodes, slightly swollen. Checked her ears, clear. Classic viral presentation. I think you've caught a little cold, sweetheart. We'll keep you home from school today. Lots of fluids, lots of rest. You'll be feeling better by tomorrow. Can you stay with me? Lily asked, and there was something in her voice, not manipulation, just hope, just wanting her father, that made the decision suddenly crystallinely clear. Yes, Ethan said. I can stay. Joan raised an eyebrow. Don't you need to sleep? I can sleep on the couch while she rests. It's fine. So he did. Dozed fitfully while Lily watched cartoons with the volume low, her small hand occasionally reaching out to pat his arm as if to make sure he was still there. Woke fully around 2 p.m. when she crawled onto the couch next to him, pressing her feverish face against his shoulder. I like when you're here, she murmured. I wish you could be here all the time. Ethan tightened his arm around her. Me too, baby. Me too. That evening, with Lily's fever down and her spirits improving, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and stared at the written warning document. He'd printed it out from the hospital portal, and now it lay before him like a test he'd been studying for all his life. The signature line waited, blank and expectant. Signing meant job security. Signing meant health insurance, steady paychecks, the ability to provide for Lily's needs. Signing meant accepting that Margaret Winters was right, that being a father made him a liability, that his love for his daughter was something to be managed and minimized and kept separate from his professional life. Not signing meant risk, meant walking into Monday's formal review with nothing but his integrity and his patient outcomes and the hope that somewhere, someone would care that those things mattered more than phone usage statistics. Ethan picked up the pen, set it down again. Picked it up. Daddy? Lily shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, the stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. What are you doing? Just some paperwork, sweetheart. You should be in bed. I'm going. I just wanted to say goodnight. She came around the table, peering at the document. What's that? Something for work. It looks important. It is. Ethan pulled her onto his lap, savoring her weight, her warmth. Lilybug, can I ask you something? Uh-huh. Do you understand that Daddy works at the hospital to help sick kids feel better? Uh-huh. You're a nurse like Mommy was. That's right, and being a good nurse is really important to me. But you know what's even more important? What? You, being your daddy, making sure you're safe and happy and loved. That will always, always be the most important job I have. Do you understand that? Lily thought about it with the seriousness of a 7-year-old considering great matters. Is somebody saying you can't do both? The question, in its childish directness, cut straight to the heart of everything. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. Yeah, somebody kind of is. That's silly, Lily declared. You're the best at both. I know because you're my daddy, and I know all the kids at the hospital like you because you told me about Tyler and his IV and how you were nice to him because you know how to be nice to kids because you're nice to me. Out of the mouths of babes, Ethan hugged her close. You're right. It is silly. Thank you for reminding me. He carried her back to bed, tucked her in, stayed until she fell asleep. Then he returned to the kitchen table and the waiting document. The pen felt heavy in his hand. Ethan thought about Sarah, about Lily, about every scared child he'd comforted, every parent he'd supported, every shift where he'd been exactly the kind of nurse he'd trained to be, compassionate, competent, present. Then he thought about Margaret Winters' office, the sterile bureaucracy of it, the reduction of human complexity to policy violations and documented instances. And finally, decisively, he capped the pen, left the document unsigned, and went to bed. Whatever happened Monday, he would face it as himself, not as a sanitized, policy-compliant version of himself, but as the man he'd become, a father first, a nurse second, and someone who refused to pretend those identities could be separated. The weekend passed too quickly. Saturday morning pancakes with Lily, Saturday afternoon at the park, Sunday church service where Lily sang in the children's choir, her small voice rising clear and true. Sunday evening, going over her homework, braiding her hair for school, reading 3 chapters of their current bedtime book. Normal things, precious things. Things that might look unremarkable from the outside, but carried the full weight of their world. Sunday night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan's phone lit up with messages from his colleagues. Amanda, whatever happens tomorrow, you've got support. Carlos, we're all behind you. Jennifer, the floor won't be the same without you, but do what you need to do. The messages told him they'd heard, they knew, they understood what Monday meant. Ethan didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like goodbye, and he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. He set his alarm for 6 a.m. and lay in the dark, listening to the building settle around him, to Lily's quiet breathing from the next room, to the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Ordinary sounds. Everyday sounds. The soundtrack of a life he'd built from ashes, held together with determination and love and the kind of strength you only discover when you have no other choice. Tomorrow, Margaret Winters would have her formal review. She would have her policy manual and her documentation and the institutional weight of Mercy General Hospital behind her. But Ethan had something too. He had his integrity, his patient outcomes, his unshakable certainty that being a father didn't make him a worse nurse, it made him a better one. And he had the quiet strength that came from having already survived the worst day of his life, which meant that losing a job, even a job he loved, couldn't destroy him. It could hurt him, it could disrupt his life and Lily's. It could create hardship and uncertainty. But it couldn't break him, because he'd already been broken 3 years ago when Sarah died, and he'd learned how to put himself back together. Differently, maybe. Changed, certainly, but whole. The alarm went off at 6 a.m. Ethan silenced it quickly, showered, dressed in the same professional clothes he'd worn to countless shifts, countless meetings, countless moments that had led to this one. In the kitchen, Joan was already up, making coffee. She looked at him with questions in her eyes, but didn't ask them. Some things were too important for words. "Wish me luck," Ethan said instead. "You don't need luck. You need them to have sense." Joan handed him a travel mug. "But for what it's worth, Sarah would be proud of you." Ethan had to look away, blinking hard. "I'm not sure about that. She might think I'm being stubborn, throwing away a good job over principle." "She'd think you're being exactly who she fell in love with. Someone who knows what matters." Joan gripped his shoulder. "Go. We'll be here when you get back, whatever happens." The drive to Mercy General felt like traveling through a dream, everything familiar but somehow distant, as if he were seeing it all through glass. Ethan parked in his usual spot, walked through the main entrance, took the elevator to the administrative floor. 9 a.m. Right on time. Margaret Winters' office door stood open. She sat behind her desk, and this time she wasn't alone. The hospital's HR director, Thomas Chen, occupied the second chair. The power dynamic had shifted. This wasn't just a supervisor addressing a problem employee. This was official. "Mr. Brooks," Margaret said, "please, sit down." Ethan entered, noting that someone had provided a third chair, positioning it across from both of them. He sat, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. "I assume you've reviewed the written warning from our previous meeting?" Margaret began. "I have." "And you've brought the signed acknowledgement?" "No." The word fell into silence. Margaret and Thomas exchanged a glance. "I see." Margaret's tone was carefully neutral. "Can you explain your refusal to sign?" "I can't acknowledge that my actions constitute policy violations requiring correction when I don't believe that to be accurate." Ethan kept his voice even, professional. "I've reviewed the documented instances. In every case, I checked my phone briefly, responded to my daughter, and immediately returned full attention to my patients. Not one of those instances resulted in delayed care, medical errors, or patient complaints." "The policy isn't about outcome to someone," Thomas interjected. "It's about maintaining professional standards and minimizing distraction." "I understand that. But if we're talking about professional standards, I'd like to discuss my full record. 8 years of exemplary service. Patient satisfaction ratings consistently in the top 5%. 0 missed shifts in the last 2 years. Multiple commendations from physicians I've worked with. I'd like to know how those factors weigh against 14 brief phone checks to ensure my 7-year-old daughter's well-being. Margaret's jaw tightened. This isn't about your clinical skills, Mr. Brooks. Then what is it about? For the first time, Ethan let some emotion into his voice. Not anger exactly, but intensity. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems to be about the fact that I'm a single father, that I have responsibilities outside this hospital, that my life doesn't conform to whatever ideal of unencumbered dedication you've decided nursing requires. That's not... Margaret started. Let me finish. Ethan held up a hand. I know you're enforcing policy. I know the hospital has legitimate concerns about liability and insurance and professional standards. I get it. But I also know that policies should serve people, not the other way around. And this policy, as you're applying it, is telling working parents that we need to choose between our children and our careers. That's not just unfair. It's counterproductive. Thomas leaned forward. How do you figure counterproductive? Because the qualities that make me a good father are the same ones that make me a good pediatric nurse. Patience, empathy, the ability to see a frightened child and understand what they need. The willingness to explain things in terms a 7-year-old can grasp, which translates directly to patient education. You think those skills emerged from nowhere? They didn't. They came from 3 years of single parenting, from learning to be present for my daughter despite exhaustion and grief and every obstacle this world could throw at us. Ethan stood, unable to sit still any longer. Last Friday night, I spent 15 minutes helping a 5-year-old accept an IV he was terrified of. You know what made the difference? I told him about my daughter, about how she taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. That connection, that understanding came directly from my distraction. So when you talk about professional standards, I'd like you to consider whether you're measuring the right things. The office went silent. Margaret stared at him with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Thomas made notes on his tablet. Those are eloquent points, Thomas said finally. But they don't change the fact that hospital policy exists for a reason. We can't make individual exceptions every time someone has a compelling personal story. I'm not asking for an exception. I'm asking for recognition that being a parent, especially a single parent, doesn't make someone a liability. It makes them more qualified to work in a pediatric unit. And I'm asking whether Mercy General wants to be the kind of institution that forces good employees out because they won't pretend their families don't exist. Margaret stood abruptly. Mr. Brooks, your insubordinate tone is not insubordinate, Ethan interrupted quietly. I've been nothing but respectful. I'm simply refusing to apologize for being a father. If that's a firing offense, then I guess we know what kind of values this hospital actually prioritizes. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Thomas and Margaret exchanged another long look. Ethan stood his ground, heart pounding but expression calm. He'd said what needed to be said. Now there was nothing to do but wait for the verdict. We'll need to discuss this, Thomas said. Mr. Brooks, please wait outside. Ethan nodded and left the office, closing the door behind him. The administrative floor's waiting area had uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. He sat, checking the time. 9:47 a.m. Lily would be in math class right now, probably working on multiplication tables. The thought steadied him. His phone buzzed. Joan. How's it going? Unknown. They're conferring. You spoke your truth? Yes. Then whatever happens, you did right. Ethan wanted to believe that. He really did. But sitting alone in the waiting area, his career hanging by a thread, his daughter's stability potentially about to be upended, doing right felt like cold comfort. The office door opened. Thomas appeared. Mr. Brooks, we're ready for you. Ethan stood on legs that felt unsteady and walked back into Margaret Winter's office for what might be the last time as an employed nurse of Mercy General Hospital. Whatever came next, termination, continued warnings, some unexpected third option, he would face it standing tall. Because that was what Sarah would have wanted. That was what Lily needed to see. And that was what Ethan had promised himself 3 years ago when he'd held his wife's hand as she died and sworn that he would be enough. For their daughter, for himself, for the life they'd have to build without her. He took his seat. looked Margaret Winters straight in the eye, and waited to learn his fate. Margaret's expression had changed. Not softened exactly, but something had shifted in the set of her shoulders, the angle of her jaw. She gestured to the chair, and Ethan sat, acutely aware of his own heartbeat, the dry click in his throat when he swallowed. "Mr. Brooks," Thomas began, his fingers steepled in front of him, "your points about parental responsibility and pediatric nursing are noted. However, we need to address the fundamental issue at hand, repeated policy violations documented over a 3-week period." "Documented by whom?" Ethan asked. "Because I'm curious about the methodology. Were other staff members similarly monitored? Or was I singled out for special surveillance?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not relevant." "I think it is. If we're discussing fairness and professional standards, then the application of those standards should be consistent across all staff members. Amanda has 3 children. Carlos cares for his elderly mother. Jennifer is managing a custody situation. Have their phone usage patterns been tracked with the same scrutiny?" Thomas made another note. "The documentation process isn't on trial here, Mr. Brooks." "Maybe it should be." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Because from my perspective, what we're really discussing is whether this hospital values nurses who understand family responsibility, or whether it prefers we pretend to be machines who clock in and out without any external concerns." "That's a dramatic interpretation," Margaret said sharply. "Is it? Then explain to me how checking on my daughter 14 times in 3 weeks, an average of less than once per shift, constitutes such a severe problem that we're having this meeting at all." "Because it demonstrates divided attention," Margaret replied, her voice rising slightly. "It demonstrates that your focus is split between patient care and personal matters. That creates risk." "Risk of what?" Ethan's calm tone contrasted with hers. "Show me the harm. Show me one instance where a patient suffered because I took 30 seconds to reassure my 7-year-old daughter that I love her. The absence of harm doesn't negate the potential for it. Then every nurse in this hospital is a potential risk. Every doctor, every technician, every human being who works here and also has a life outside these walls. We all have moments of divided attention. We all have people we love who need us. The question isn't whether those moments exist, it's how we handle them while still maintaining excellence in patient care." Thomas held up a hand. "Let's take a step back. Mr. Brooks, you've refused to sign the written warning. That puts us in a difficult position administratively. We need to know whether you're willing to comply with hospital policy going forward." "That depends on what compliance looks like," Ethan said carefully. "If it means never checking my phone during a shift, even during breaks or downtime, even in emergencies, then no. I can't agree to that. My daughter's safety isn't negotiable." "No one is asking you to ignore emergencies," Margaret interjected. "But who defines emergency? You? Because to you, a 7-year-old having a nightmare at 2 a.m. isn't an emergency. To me, to her, it absolutely is. She's already lost her mother. When she reaches out for her father in the middle of the night and gets nothing back, that's traumatic. That's harmful. So forgive me if I don't trust your definition of what constitutes a situation worthy of response." The words came out harder than Ethan had intended, sharp with 3 years of accumulated grief and exhaustion and fierce protective love. He watched them land, watched Margaret flinch slightly, watched Thomas's expression shift into something more thoughtful. "I understand you've experienced loss," Thomas said quietly. "I do. But we have to consider—" "Do you?" Ethan interrupted. "Do you really understand? Have you ever sat in a hospital room and watched someone you love die? Have you ever had to explain to a 4-year-old that mommy isn't coming home? Have you ever been the only parent standing between your child and the world, knowing that if you fail, there's no backup, no safety net, just you and whatever strength you can scrape together?" The office went silent. Ethan realized his hands were shaking and forced them still. This was not how he'd planned to conduct himself, with emotion leaking through his professional composure, with his pain on display like an open wound. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe they needed to see him as a whole person, not just a policy violation. "I apologize," he said, moderating his tone. "That was unprofessional. But I need you to understand that this isn't abstract to me. Every decision I make about my daughter carries weight that I don't think either of you can fully grasp unless you've lived it. And yes, that affects how I do my job. It makes me better at it. It makes me the kind of nurse who remembers that every patient is someone's entire world. Margaret had been quiet during this exchange, her face unreadable. Now she spoke, and her voice carried an edge that made Ethan's stomach tighten. Your personal circumstances are unfortunate, Mr. Brooks, but they don't entitle you to special treatment or exemption from the rules that govern everyone else. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for basic human decency. I'm asking for recognition that good nursing doesn't require sacrificing one's family on the altar of inflexible policy. You're asking us to ignore documented violations because you have a sad backstory, Margaret shot back. That's not how institutions function. We have policies for reasons, to protect patients, to maintain standards, to ensure consistency. If we start making exceptions every time someone has a compelling emotional appeal, where does it end? It ends with better patient care, Ethan said firmly. It ends with nurses who are supported in being whole human beings, which makes them more effective, more compassionate, more present when they're here. You want to know why patient satisfaction on my shifts is so high? It's because I've learned how to be present for people who are scared and in pain. I learned that from being present for my daughter through her worst moments. You can't separate those skills. Thomas rubbed his temples. I see both sides of this. Truly, I do. But Mr. Brooks, you have to understand our position. We have liability concerns. We have insurance requirements. We have a board of directors who expect us to maintain certain standards. Your refusal to sign the warning puts us in a position where we either have to document progressive discipline leading to termination, or we have to appear to be giving you preferential treatment that could open us up to claims from other staff. Then maybe the problem isn't me, Ethan said quietly. Maybe the problem is a system that treats basic human needs as preferential treatment. Maybe the problem is that we've built healthcare around the assumption that caregivers shouldn't need care themselves. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is circular reasoning. We're not here to debate healthcare philosophy. We're here to address your refusal to comply with established protocol. And I've explained why I can't comply with something I fundamentally disagree with, Ethan replied, also standing. So where does that leave us? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This was the moment. This was where Margaret would tell him to clean out his locker, where Thomas would outline the termination process, where Ethan's career at Mercy General would end. But before either of them could speak, Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and something flickered across her face. Surprise, then concern, then something almost like fear. I need to take this, she said abruptly. It's my sister, she answered, turning away slightly. Kelly, what's wrong? Ethan watched as Margaret's posture changed, her spine going rigid. When did this happen? Is she at St. Mary's? I'm coming now. No, don't. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She ended the call, and when she turned back, her face had gone pale. I have to leave. Family emergency. Thomas stood. Of course. Is everything... My mother, she fell. They think she broke her hip. Margaret was already gathering her things, her movements jerky with barely controlled panic. I need to go to the hospital. Ethan found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. Which hospital? St. Mary's. Why does it... I know the orthopedic team there. Dr. Harrison is excellent. If your mother needs surgery, make sure you ask for him specifically. The words came automatically, nurse to worried family member, professional knowledge offered without thinking. Margaret stared at him, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, the rigid facade cracked. I can't. I have meetings all afternoon. I have the schedule to finalize. I can't just... Yes, you can, Ethan said gently. You can and you should. Your mother needs you. Everything else can wait. But there's coverage to arrange and I'll handle it. The offer emerged instinctively. I know your schedule. I can make the necessary calls, push what can be pushed, delegate what can be delegated. You go be with your mother. Thomas looked between them, clearly uncertain. Mr. Brooks, given the circumstances of this meeting, are irrelevant right now, Ethan finished. Miss Winters has a family emergency. That takes priority. We can resume our discussion another time. Margaret stood frozen, her tablet clutched against her chest, looking lost in a way that seemed completely foreign to her usual controlled demeanor. I don't understand. Why would you help me when I was just... Because it's the right thing to do, Ethan said simply. Because you're scared for your mother and you need to be with her. Because that's what people do for each other, even when they disagree, especially then. Something shifted in Margaret's expression, but there wasn't time to process it. She nodded jerkily, grabbed her coat, and rushed toward the door. Then she paused, looking back. Thank you, she said, and the words sounded like they cost her something. We'll continue this when I get back. Take care of your mom, Ethan replied. That's what matters right now. She left, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. And then it was just Ethan and Thomas in the office. The momentum of the confrontation dissipated like smoke. Thomas sat down slowly, studying Ethan with an expression that might have been respect. That was unexpected. Was it? Ethan sank back into his chair, suddenly exhausted. She needed help. I could provide it. Nothing complicated about that. After she was essentially preparing to fire you, you offered to cover her work responsibilities so she could be with her family. Most people would have seen that as poetic justice. I'm not most people, and her mother's broken hip isn't justice for anything. It's just a scared older woman in pain and her daughter trying to be there for her. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Look, I don't like Margaret Winters very much. I think her approach to management is rigid, and her understanding of work-life balance is fundamentally flawed. But I'm not going to punish her for having the same human needs I've been arguing she should respect in me. Thomas made another note on his tablet, but this time he was almost smiling. You practice what you preach. I can respect that. So what happens now? Ethan asked. With the review, I mean. Does this meeting continue when she returns, or... Honestly, I don't know. This situation has become significantly more complex than a standard policy violation case. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Off the record, Mr. Brooks, I think you made some valid points about parenting and nursing, about the qualities that make someone good at both. But I also think you need to understand that institutions can't function on individual judgment alone. We need consistent policies, even imperfect ones, because the alternative is chaos. I understand that, but I also think policies that don't account for basic human realities end up doing more harm than good. They force good employees out, they create resentment and fear, and they ultimately undermine the very values they're supposed to protect. Perhaps. Thomas stood, signaling the meeting's end. For now, consider yourself on paid administrative leave pending resolution of this matter. That gives everyone some breathing room to figure out the best path forward. Am I being suspended? You're being given space. There's a difference. You'll continue to receive full pay and benefits. You won't be expected to work shifts, and when Ms. Winters returns, we'll reassess how to proceed. Thomas extended his hand. I meant what I said. You practice what you preach. That counts for something. Ethan shook his hand, then left the office in a daze. Administrative leave. Not fired, but not exactly vindicated either. Suspended in limbo, his future uncertain, his job hanging by a thread that could snap at any moment. He walked through the hospital in a fog, barely registering the familiar hallways, the sounds and smells that had been his professional home for 8 years. Past the pediatric wing, where his colleagues were starting their shifts, where patients waited for care, where his life's work existed in a state of potential past tense. Carlos caught him at the elevator. Hey man, how'd it go? I don't know, Ethan admitted. Margaret had a family emergency. I'm on administrative leave until they figure things out. Family emergency? Carlos's eyes widened. What kind of hate? Her mother. Broken hip. She had to go be with her. And they just let you leave? Without resolving anything? Not exactly. Ethan stepped into the elevator, suddenly desperate to be outside, away from the building that held both his career and its potential ending. It's complicated. I'll explain later. He drove home on autopilot, his mind replaying the meeting in fragments. Margaret's face when he'd offered to help. Thomas's measured consideration of his arguments. The fundamental impossibility of being heard by people who'd never lived the reality he was trying to describe. Joan met him at the door, her expression transforming from expectant to concerned. You're home early. What happened? Administrative leave, maybe fired, maybe not. It's unclear. Ethan collapsed onto the couch. Where's Lily? Still at school. Ethan, what do you mean unclear? So he told her the whole strange story, his arguments, Margaret's rebuttals, the phone call that had interrupted everything, his offer to help despite the circumstances. Joan listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, understanding, and finally something that might have been pride. You helped the woman who was trying to fire you, she said when he finished. Her mother needed her. What was I supposed to do? Most people would have let her twist in the wind, would have seen it as karma. I'm not most people, and I meant what I said to Thomas. I can't ask for compassion if I'm not willing to extend it, even to people who frustrate me. Ethan leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. Besides, maybe she'll understand now. Maybe having to choose between her job and her family will help her see why her policy is so damaging. Or maybe she'll resent you for witnessing her moment of weakness, Joan said gently. People don't always respond to kindness with gratitude, especially when that kindness highlights their own hypocrisy. I know, but I had to try. Ethan closed his eyes. Sarah would have done the same thing. Yes, she would have. She always did see the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Joan patted his knee. What now? Now I wait, and figure out what to tell Lily about why I'm home during the day. As if summoned by her name, the front door opened, and Lily burst in with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Daddy, you're home. Are you sick? Ethan pulled her into a hug, breathing in the little girl's smell of her, shampoo and playground dust and something indefinably sweet. No, sweetheart, I'm not sick. I just have some time off from work. Like a vacation? Sort of. It means I get to spend more time with you for a while. Lily's face lit up with uncomplicated joy. Really? Can we go to the park? Can we make cookies? Can we have a movie night? Yes to all of those things. But first, how was school? She launched into a detailed account of her day. A spelling test she'd aced, a disagreement with her friend Emma about whose turn it was on the swings, a new art project they were starting. Normal childhood concerns, blissfully unaware of the adult complexities swirling around her. Ethan listened and responded and let himself be pulled into her world, where the biggest problem was swing set diplomacy and the greatest triumph was spelling because correctly. That evening, they made cookies, chocolate chip, Lily's favorite. Flour dusted the kitchen counter, and Lily ate more dough than made it onto the baking sheet, and for a few hours, Ethan let himself forget about written warnings and administrative leave and careers hanging in the balance. This was what mattered. This warmth, this laughter, this small hand in his as they mixed ingredients and licked spoons and waited impatiently for the timer to ding. After Lily went to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, staring at job search websites without really seeing them. Maybe this was it. Maybe Mercy General was done with him, and he needed to start planning for what came next. Other hospitals. Other cities even, if necessary. The thought made him tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. His phone rang. Unknown number. Ethan answered cautiously. Hello? Mr. Brooks? This is Dr. Rebecca Harrison from St. Mary's Orthopedics. It took Ethan a moment to place the name, the doctor he'd mentioned to Margaret. Dr. Harrison, is everything all right? I hope I'm not calling too late. Margaret Winters gave me your number. She wanted me to thank you for the referral. We just finished her mother's surgery, successful hip replacement. Prognosis is excellent. That's wonderful news. I'm glad I could help. She also wanted me to tell you something else. Dr. Harrison's voice carried a note of curiosity. She said to tell you that she understands now. Does that make sense to you? Ethan's breath caught. Yes. Yes, it does. She was quite insistent I call tonight, despite the late hour. Said it was important, you know. A pause. She also mentioned she'd been unfair to you about something. I don't know the details, but she seemed genuinely regretful. Thank you for letting me know, Dr. Harrison, and thank you for taking care of her mother. Of course. Take care, Mr. Brooks. Ethan set the phone down, staring at it as if it might offer further explanation. She understands now. What did that mean? that she'd experienced the panic of needing to be in two places at once, that she'd felt the impossible pull of professional obligation versus family crisis, that she'd realized, sitting in a hospital waiting room, that her rigid policies were inflicting that same impossible choice on others? Or was it just guilt, temporary and surface level, that would evaporate once her mother was stable and Margaret returned to the comfortable certainty of her position? Only time would tell. And time was something Ethan now had in abundance, courtesy of administrative leave. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fought for the right to be present for his daughter, and now he was being forced into presence by suspension. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. Ethan woke with Lily, made her breakfast, walked her to school. Spent the mornings doing things he'd been putting off for months, grocery shopping during off-peak hours, taking the car in for maintenance, organizing closets, fixing the crooked nameplate by the door, normal domestic tasks that felt surreal in their ordinariness. Afternoons, he picked Lily up from school. They went to the park, did homework together, cooked dinner side by side. She was delighted by his constant presence, treating it like an extended holiday. Ethan tried to match her joy, but underneath ran a current of anxiety he couldn't quite shake. What if this was permanent? What if he never went back? On the third day, Thomas Chen called. "Mr. Brooks, we need to talk. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "Of course. What time?" 9 a.m., same office." A pause. "Margaret will be there. She got back today and she's requested the meeting." Requested, not demanded? Her words were, "I need to speak with Ethan Brooks as soon as possible. Make of that what you will." Ethan hung up and stared at the phone. She needed to speak with him, not discipline him, not process his termination. Speak with him. It felt significant, but Ethan had learned not to hope too hard. Hope was a luxury he couldn't always afford. That night, after tucking Lily in, he stood in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep. The nightlight cast soft shadows across her face, Sarah's face, echoing forward through time. If he lost his job, they'd be okay. It would be hard, but they'd survive. They'd survived worse. But he didn't want to just survive. He wanted to thrive. Wanted Lily to see that standing up for your principles didn't always end in punishment, that sometimes, occasionally, the world surprised you with grace instead of consequences. Morning came too quickly. Ethan dressed carefully, the same professional attire from the first meeting. Joan arrived early to stay with Lily, her face anxious despite her encouraging words. "Whatever happens," she said, gripping his shoulders, "you did the right thing. Remember that." "I will." "Thanks, Joan." The drive to Mercy General felt different this time. Less like heading to execution, more like walking towards something unknown, but not necessarily terrible. The parking lot was familiar, the building unchanged. But Ethan felt shifted, altered somehow by the past few days of domesticity and uncertainty. He arrived at the administrative floor with 10 minutes to spare, sat in the same uncomfortable waiting area chair, watching the clock tick toward 9. Right on time, Thomas emerged and gestured him inside. Margaret Winters stood by the window, her back to the door. She turned when Ethan entered, and he was startled by the change in her appearance. She looked tired, older somehow, the rigid armor of her professional persona slightly dented. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." "Of course." Ethan took the offered seat, hyper-aware of the altered atmosphere. Something fundamental had shifted. Thomas closed the door and settled behind the desk, but this time he remained silent, clearly ceding the floor to Margaret. She sat across from Ethan, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret drew a breath and began. "My mother is recovering well. The surgery was successful, and Dr. Harrison expects a full return to mobility within a few months." She paused. "I wanted to start by thanking you for the referral and for covering my responsibilities while I was at the hospital." "You're welcome. I'm glad your mother is doing better." "She is, but that's not why I asked for this meeting." Margaret folded her hands on the desk, and Ethan noticed they were trembling slightly. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Brooks. A significant one." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry?" "When I got that call, when my sister told me my mother had fallen, everything I'd said to you, every argument I'd made about policy and professionalism, it all just evaporated. In that moment, nothing mattered except getting to her. The meetings I had scheduled, the work that needed to be done, the professional standards I'd been so rigid about enforcing, none of it mattered. Only she mattered. Margaret's voice wavered slightly. And then you offered to help. You, who I had been systematically documenting and preparing to terminate. You offered to handle my responsibilities so I could be with my family. Do you have any idea how that made me feel? I can imagine it was complicated. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. A ghost of a smile crossed Margaret's face. I spent the entire drive to St. Mary's thinking about what you'd said. About being a parent making you a better nurse, not a worse one. About policies serving people instead of the other way around. And then I sat in that waiting room for 4 hours while my mother was in surgery, and I understood. She met Ethan's eyes directly. I'm also a caregiver, Mr. Brooks. My mother has been declining for a while, early-stage dementia, mobility issues. I've been managing her care while working full-time, and it's been challenging. More than challenging. Impossible most days, but I kept it hidden, kept it separate because I believed that was what professionalism required. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. You were doing exactly what you were criticizing me for. Worse, I was criticizing you for being honest about it while I hid in shame. Margaret's hands tightened on the desk. Sitting in that hospital, fielding work calls while my mother was in surgery, trying to maintain control of situations that didn't actually need my immediate attention, I realized I'd been enforcing the same impossible standards on you that were killing me, the same choice between career and family that's been tearing me apart for months. Thomas shifted slightly, clearly hearing some of this for the first time. I thought if I could be strict enough, rigid enough, maybe I could control the chaos, Margaret continued. If I could enforce perfect compliance, perfect separation between personal and professional, then maybe I could justify my own failures at maintaining that separation. But watching you, seeing how you integrated your role as a father into your nursing instead of compartmentalizing it, it terrified me. Because it suggested there might be another way, and I was too afraid to consider it. Why afraid? Ethan asked gently. Because if I acknowledged that being a caregiver made me more compassionate rather than less professional, then I'd have to admit I'd been wrong. About the policies, about the approach, about everything I'd built my management style around. Margaret's voice dropped almost to a whisper. And I'd have to face how much I'd been suffering unnecessarily, how much I'd been punishing myself and others for having normal human needs. The office fell silent. Ethan processed this revelation, this unexpected vulnerability from someone who'd seemed incapable of it just days ago. When Dr. Harrison told me my mother's surgery was successful, Margaret said, the first thing I felt was relief. The second thing was shame, because I'd been so focused on work, so consumed by maintaining appearances, that I'd nearly missed being there for her when she needed me most. And if you hadn't helped, if you hadn't covered for me despite having every reason not to, I might have.
You would have figured it out, Ethan said. Maybe. But you made it easier. You extended grace I didn't deserve, and it forced me to see clearly what I'd been doing to you. Margaret pulled out a folder, extracted the written warning document Ethan had refused to sign. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. There will be no termination. No further disciplinary action. This matter is closed. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should never have put you in this position. Margaret tore the document again, reducing it to quarters. But I want to do more than just drop the issue. I want to fix the underlying problem. Thomas leaned forward. What are you proposing? A policy review. A comprehensive look at how we handle caregiver responsibilities across the hospital. Phone usage guidelines that acknowledge emergency contact needs. Flexible scheduling options for staff with family obligations.
Support systems for single parents and caregivers. Margaret's voice gained strength as she spoke. We should be making it easier for our staff to be whole people, not forcing them to choose between their families and their careers. That's a significant undertaking, Thomas said carefully. It would require board approval, input from multiple departments, significant resource allocation. I know, and I'm prepared to lead the initiative. Mr. Brooks, I'd like you to be involved as well. Your perspective is invaluable, and I think the policy would be stronger with your input. Ethan stared at her, trying to process the rapid shift from potential termination to policy collaboration.
I'd be honored, but I'm surprised you'd want me involved after you exposed the flaws in my thinking, after you demonstrated a better way. Margaret almost smiled. I'd be a fool not to learn from someone who clearly has it more figured out than I do. I don't know about that, Ethan said honestly. I'm mostly just stumbling through trying to keep all the plates spinning. That's exactly the perspective we need. People who understand the real challenges, not just theoretical policy positions. Margaret glanced at Thomas. I know this isn't how these meetings usually go. No, Thomas agreed, but he was smiling slightly. But I can't say I'm unhappy with the outcome. Mr. Brooks, are you willing to return to your regular schedule? Absolutely. Then consider your administrative leave ended. You can resume shifts whenever you're ready. Relief flooded through Ethan, warm and overwhelming. Not fired, not terminated, not forced to choose, just restored. Given back the job he loved, the work that mattered, the ability to provide for his daughter without sacrificing his presence in her life. There's one more thing, Margaret said. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a different folder. Your patient satisfaction ratings, your clinical outcomes, your colleague evaluations, they're all exemplary, more than exemplary. I've recommended you for the Excellence in Pediatric Nursing Award. It comes with a modest raise and formal recognition at the annual hospital gala. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept. Say you'll help me make this hospital a better place for caregivers. Say you'll forgive me for nearly destroying something valuable because I was too blind to see it. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. Truly, deeply sorry. I forgive you, Ethan said simply, and meant it, because holding grudges required energy he didn't have, and because Margaret's vulnerability had revealed her humanity in a way that demanded grace. And I'll help however I can. They shook hands, and it felt like more than a professional courtesy. It felt like the beginning of something new, not just for Ethan, not just for Margaret, but for everyone at Mercy General who'd been struggling in silence, caught between love and livelihood, wondering if they had to choose. Ethan left the office feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The hallway seemed brighter, the future less uncertain. He walked through the hospital, past the pediatric wing where he'd return tomorrow, past colleagues who greeted him with relief and questions he didn't yet have energy to answer. In the parking lot, he sat in his car and called Joan. It's good news, he said before she could ask. I'm not fired. She apologized. They're changing the policies. Joan's sob of relief came clearly through the phone. Oh, thank heavens. I've been praying all morning. Tell Lily I'll pick her up from school today. And Joan, tell her we're celebrating tonight, whatever she wants for dinner. He drove home slowly, letting the reality sink in. Not just survival, but something better. Not just keeping his job, but potentially changing things for everyone who came after him. It felt too good to be true, too neat. But Ethan had learned that sometimes grace arrived unexpectedly, in forms you couldn't have predicted. That afternoon, he picked Lily up from school and took her for ice cream, because some moments demanded celebration before explanation. They sat at a sticky table with double scoops melting faster than they could eat them, and Lily chattered about her day while Ethan basked in the simple joy of being present for it. Daddy, why are you smiling so much? Lily asked, chocolate ice cream dotting her chin. Because I'm happy, Lilybug. Really, truly happy. Because you're not sick anymore? Because your vacation is over? Something like that. I get to go back to work tomorrow, and I get to keep spending time with you, and everything is going to be okay. Lily considered this. It was already okay. You're always with me, even when you're at the hospital. You said so. Out of the mouths of babes, Ethan reached across to wipe the chocolate from her face. You're absolutely right. I did say that, and it's true. They finished their ice cream and headed home, where Joan waited with barely contained curiosity. Ethan told her everything, Margaret's apology, the policy changes, the award nomination. Joan listened with tears streaming down her face, occasionally reaching over to grip his hand. Sarah would be so proud, she said when he finished. Not just because you kept your job, but because you stood up for what was right and somehow managed to change minds in the process. I don't know if I changed mine so much as Margaret had an experience that opened her eyes, Ethan said. But yeah, I hope Sarah would be proud.
She is, Joan said with certainty. Wherever she is, she's cheering for you. That night, after Lily was asleep and Joan had gone home, Ethan sat in the quiet apartment and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back. The fear, the relief, the lingering anxiety that something might still go wrong. But underneath it all, a deep, resonant certainty that he'd done the right thing. That refusing to sign had been correct. That helping Margaret had been correct. That every choice made from a place of love and integrity had led to this moment. His phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Thank you again. My mother asked about you today. Said anyone who'd recommend Dr. Harrison must be a good person. She'd like to meet you sometime. Ethan smiled and typed back. I'd be honored. Give her my best wishes for recovery. A pause, then, I will. And Ethan, your daughter is lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Ethan replied. See you tomorrow. He set the phone down and walked to Lily's room, standing in the doorway as he'd done countless times before. She slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. This was what he'd fought for. This was what made every difficult moment worthwhile. Tomorrow he'd return to work, to the patients who needed him, to the colleagues who'd supported him, to the job he loved. But tonight, he simply stood watch over his daughter and let himself be grateful for grace, for second chances, for the unexpected ways that standing firm in truth could transform not just individual lives, but entire systems. The morning sun filtered through Ethan's bedroom window with a quality of light he'd almost forgotten, the particular brightness of a new beginning. He dressed for his first shift back with deliberate care, each familiar motion carrying weight it hadn't held before. The scrubs felt different against his skin, not because they'd changed, but because he had. Lily appeared in his doorway, still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. You're going back to the hospital today? I am, sweetheart. Ethan knelt down to her level. But remember what we talked about. I can still text you during my breaks, and Grammy will be here after school. I know. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. I'm glad you're going back. The kids there need you. The simple faith in her voice made Ethan's chest tight. He held her close for an extra moment, breathing in her little girl warmth, then released her with a smile. And I'll be home before you know it. Now go wake up Grammy. She's sleeping on the couch and probably needs coffee. The drive to Mercy General felt surreal, familiar streets leading to a destination that was somehow both unchanged and entirely transformed. Ethan parked in his usual spot, noting how the morning shift was arriving in clusters, nurses chatting over travel mugs, doctors hurrying in with briefcases, the daily choreography of a hospital coming to life. Carlos intercepted him at the entrance, practically bouncing with relief. Man, it's good to see you back. The floor's been chaos without you. I was only gone a few days. Felt like months. Amanda's been covering your patients, but you know how the kids are. They ask for you specifically. Carlos lowered his voice. Word is Winters had some kind of revelation. That true? Something like that. Ethan didn't elaborate. Margaret's story was hers to tell, not his. Things are changing, for the better, I think. But just must that boss saying down. They walked together through the main corridor, past the cafeteria where the morning coffee rush was in full swing, past the pharmacy where the night shift pharmacist was completing her final rounds. Everything exactly as it had always been, except Ethan saw it differently now. Each person carrying their own burdens, their own impossible balances between work and life, all of them deserving the grace he'd fought for. The pediatric wing greeted him with its familiar sounds, the soft beep of monitors, a child's laughter from one of the rooms, the hushed conversations of worried parents. Amanda looked up from the nurse's station, her face breaking into a genuine smile. There he is, our returning hero. Hardly heroic, just stubborn. Ethan signed in, scanning the patient board. What have we got today? Amanda handed him a chart. Room 308, new admission, 8-year-old with suspected appendicitis waiting for surgery consult. Room 312. You remember Emma? She's back with another respiratory flare-up. Been asking for you. And 315 is Tyler, post-op from his tonsillectomy. Parents specifically requested you for his recovery care. The normalcy of it washed over Ethan like a benediction. This was his world. These were his people. He took the charts and headed for room 312 first, where Emma's mother sat by the bedside looking exhausted. "Nurse Ethan," Emma's small voice was raspy but delighted. "You came back!" "Of course I did. Couldn't leave my favorite patient without her favorite nurse, could I?" Ethan checked her oxygen levels, noted the slight improvement since yesterday's admission. "How are you breathing, sweetheart?" "Better today?" "But Mom's worried." Emma glanced at her mother with the perceptiveness children develop too early when illness is a constant companion. "Your mom is doing exactly what moms should do, taking care of you." Ethan turned to Emma's mother with understanding. "The numbers look good. Dr. Patterson will be by later, but I think we're trending in the right direction." Relief flooded the woman's face. "Thank you. She was so upset when she heard you weren't here, kept asking when you'd be back." "Well, I'm back now, and I'm not going anywhere." The words carried more weight than Emma's mother could know, a promise made as much to himself as to his patients. The morning progressed in the familiar rhythm of pediatric nursing: medication rounds, vitals checks, the delicate balance of treating illness while minimizing fear. In room 308, Ethan explained appendicitis to a terrified 8-year-old using a stuffed bear and a gentleness born from explaining difficult things to Lily. In room 315, Tyler's recovery went smoothly, his parents visibly relaxing under Ethan's calm competence. Around 11, Margaret Winters appeared at the nurses' station. The change in her was subtle but unmistakable. She stood less rigidly, her expression more open, her entire demeanor somehow softer around the edges. "Mr. Brooks, do you have a moment?" The surrounding staff went quiet, tension crackling through the air. They'd all heard about the confrontation, the administrative leave, though details remained fuzzy. Now they watched with barely concealed curiosity as Ethan followed Margaret to a quiet corner. "I wanted to check in," she said quietly. "How's your first day back?" "Good. Really good, actually. It feels right to be here." "I'm glad." Margaret glanced at the patient board, then back to Ethan. "I've scheduled the first policy review meeting for next Tuesday. I'd like you there if you're willing. We'll have representatives from HR, nursing administration, and staff representatives from different departments. I'll be there." "I've also been thinking about implementation." Margaret's voice carried a note of uncertainty unusual for her. "About how to make these changes meaningful rather than just performative. I'd value your input on that." Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Lily's school number. His hand moved instinctively toward it, then stopped, old anxiety flaring. He glanced at Margaret. "Answer it," she said firmly. "Please." Ethan pulled out his phone, acutely aware of Margaret watching. "Hello? Mr. Brooks, this is Principal Chen. Nothing serious, but Lily's feeling a bit under the weather. Says her stomach hurts. She's in the nurse's office. We're not sure if it's something she ate or if she's coming down with something, but she's asking for you." Ethan's mind immediately shifted into assessment mode. "What are her symptoms exactly?" "Upset stomach, says everything feels wrong. No fever. The school nurse thinks it might be anxiety." Anxiety? Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Of course. His return to work, the disruption in routine, the lingering stress even children absorbed without understanding it. "I'll come get her. I can be there in 20 minutes. "Thank you. She'll be relieved." Ethan ended the call and turned to Margaret, already forming the explanation, the apology, the "Go," Margaret said before he could speak. "Your daughter needs you." "I have patience. Who will be here when you get back? Amanda can cover for an hour or two. Go be with Lily." The simplicity of it, the lack of judgment or documentation or consequences, made Ethan's throat tighten. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just go." "And Ethan?" Margaret's expression was earnest. "Bring her back here if you need to. Let her see where you work, meet your colleagues. Sometimes seeing the place demystifies the anxiety." Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the sudden emotion, and headed for the exit. Behind him, he heard Margaret addressing the staff at the nurses' station. "Mr. Brooks will be back shortly. Amanda, can you cover his patients?" And everyone, I wanted understood that family emergencies are exactly that. Emergencies. They take priority. No questions, no documentation, no penalties. Is that clear? A chorus of agreement followed Ethan out the door. He drove to Lily's school with his heart pounding, navigating the familiar route on autopilot. The elementary school's cheerful murals and playground equipment stood in contrast to his worry. Inside, the nurse's office smelled like hand sanitizer and old Band-Aids. Lily sat on the examination table, her small frame hunched, her face pale. When she saw Ethan, tears spilled over. "Daddy!" He was across the room in 3 strides, gathering her against him. "Hey, Lilybug, I'm here. Tell me what's wrong. My tummy hurts and my head feels funny, and I couldn't stop thinking about—" She hiccuped. "What if you didn't come back from the hospital again? What if something happened like with Mommy?" There it was. The fear that lived underneath everything, the wound that had never fully healed because how could it when the person who'd inflicted it, death itself, remained an ever-present possibility? Ethan held her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head. "Oh, sweetheart, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm healthy and strong, and I'm going to be around for a very, very long time." But Mommy was healthy too, and then she wasn't. The school nurse quietly excused herself, giving them privacy. Ethan sat on the examination table, pulling Lily fully into his lap, and struggled to find words that would offer comfort without false promises. "You're right," he said finally. "Mommy was healthy, and then she got sick, and that was scary and terrible and so unfair. But Lily, look at me." He waited until her tear-filled eyes met his. "I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen. I can't promise I'll never get sick or hurt, but I can promise that I'm doing everything I can to stay healthy and safe. And I can promise that even when I'm at work, I'm always thinking about you, always connected to you, always your daddy. But what if it's a scary place to live, baby girl? I know, because I live there too sometimes. What if something happens to you? What if I can't keep you safe? What if I mess up being both mom and dad?" Ethan smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "But we can't let what if stop us from living. We have to trust that most days are going to be okay days, and that even on the hard days, we have each other." Lily pressed her face against his shoulder. "I don't like when you're at work." "I know, but you know what? I have an idea. My boss, Miss Winters, remember I told you about her? She said maybe you could come see the hospital. See where I work? Meet the kids I help, so it's not this scary unknown place in your head. Would that help?" Lily pulled back slightly. "Really? I could come to your hospital?" "If you want to. Not today. Today you and I are going home, and we're going to have lunch together and maybe watch a movie until your tummy feels better. But maybe this weekend I could take you on a tour, show you the pediatric wing, introduce you to some of my friends there." Interest flickered through Lily's anxiety. "Would I see the sick kids?" "Some of them, if they're feeling well enough for visitors. You could see that they're regular kids, just kids who need extra help right now. And you could see that I'm helping them, and that I'm safe while I do it." "Okay?" Lily's voice was small but steadier. "I think I'd like that." Ethan signed her out, carrying her to the car despite her protests that she was big enough to walk. She wasn't that big, not yet. Still small enough to need carrying when the world felt overwhelming. Still his baby girl, no matter how much she grew. At home, they made grilled cheese sandwiches, comfort food that required minimal effort, and settled on the couch with a stack of Pixar movies. Lily's stomachache faded as the afternoon wore on, anxiety loosening its grip when her father's presence became concrete and constant. "Daddy?" she asked during a quiet moment. "Are you going back to work tomorrow?" "I am, but I'll text you on my breaks, just like always, and you can text me if you need me. And Friday after school, if you're feeling up to it, we'll go see the hospital together, okay?" "Okay." Lily snuggled closer. "I'm sorry I got scared." "Don't apologize for feelings, Lilybug. Feelings aren't wrong. They just are. It's what we do with them that matters." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "And you did exactly right. You told the school nurse and she called me and I came. That's the system working." They dozed together on the couch, afternoon sunlight painting stripes across the floor. When Joan arrived to check on them, she found them asleep, Lily's head on Ethan's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. "How is she?" Joan whispered. "Better. Anxiety about me going back to work." Ethan carefully extracted himself from under Lily, covering her with a blanket. "I'm going to take her to see the hospital this weekend. Let her visualize where I am, what I'm doing. That's a good idea. Sarah used to bring Lily to visit when she was tiny, before she got sick. Lily probably doesn't remember, but there are pictures. They moved to the kitchen, speaking quietly. I should get back to the hospital, Ethan said. Finish out my shift. Go, I've got her. Ethan returned to Mercy General to find the afternoon shift in full swing. Amanda had handled his patients beautifully, but they visibly relaxed when he appeared to finish out the day.
In room 312, Emma asked if his daughter was okay, demonstrating the reciprocal care that made this work so meaningful. She's fine, sweetheart. Just needed her daddy for a little bit. Like I need my mom, Emma said wisely. Daddies and mommies are important. They sure are. The shift ended without incident. Ethan completed his charting, said goodbye to the night staff, and walked out into the early evening with a sense of completion. One day back, successfully navigated. One small crisis handled. One step forward into this new reality where being a father and being a nurse weren't opposing forces but complementary truths. Over the next few days, the rhythm solidified. Ethan returned to his regular schedule. His patients welcomed him back with the uncomplicated joy of children who'd missed a favorite caregiver, and his colleagues adjusted to Margaret's transformed approach to management. The change in her was remarkable. She made rounds through the pediatric wing, actually stopping to talk with staff rather than just observing for violations. She asked Amanda about her kids, Carlos about his mother, Jennifer about her custody situation. Small gestures, but revolutionary coming from someone who'd previously treated personal life as professional liability. On Tuesday, the policy review meeting convened in the hospital's largest conference room. Ethan arrived to find an unexpectedly diverse group, nursing staff from multiple departments, HR representatives, the hospital's legal counsel, and several administrators he recognized but had never spoken to directly. Margaret stood at the head of the table, her presentation already loaded on the screen. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss comprehensive policy reform regarding staff work-life balance, with particular focus on caregiver responsibilities and family emergency protocols. She clicked to the first slide, which showed current policy language, the same rigid phone usage rules that had nearly cost Ethan his job. This is what we have. It's inadequate, punitive, and ultimately counterproductive. Here's what I'm proposing. The next slide outlined a new framework: reasonable phone access during designated break times, streamlined emergency notification systems, flexible scheduling options for parents and caregivers, and most importantly, a fundamental shift in how family responsibilities were viewed. The goal, Margaret continued, is to move from treating family obligations as distractions that must be managed to recognizing them as integral parts of employees' lives that deserve support and accommodation. One of the administrators raised a hand. What about liability concerns? Our insurance requires certain professional standards. Which we'll maintain, Margaret assured him. But professional standards and human compassion aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, I'd argue that supporting our staff's well-being enhances professionalism by reducing stress, preventing burnout, and creating a work environment that attracts and retains the best people. She looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Brooks has agreed to share his perspective as both a single parent and a pediatric nurse. Ethan? All eyes turned to him. Ethan stood, his pulse quickening but his voice steady when he spoke. 3 weeks ago, I was facing termination because I checked on my daughter during shifts. 14 times in 3 weeks, less than once per shift, to make sure a 7-year-old who'd lost her mother knew her father was still there. That's what the old policy considered a fireable offense. He paused, letting that sink in. But here's what that policy missed. Every time I comforted my daughter through a nightmare, I became better at comforting scared children in the hospital. Every time I explained something complicated in terms a 7-year-old could understand, I improved my patient education skills. Every time I balanced my grief with my responsibility to keep going, I developed the resilience that makes me good in crisis situations. Ethan walked to the presentation screen, pointing at the current policy. This treats caregiving as a weakness, but caregiving is a strength, especially in healthcare. We should be asking how to support it, not suppress it. A nurse from the surgical floor spoke up. But what about staff who don't have kids? Is this fair to them? It's not just about parents, Ethan replied.
It's about anyone with caregiving responsibilities. Aging parents, sick spouses, disabled siblings, even friends who need support. We're talking about recognizing that every human being has a life outside these walls, and that supporting that life makes us better at the work we do within them. The discussion that followed was robust, sometimes contentious, but ultimately productive. Legal raised concerns, which were addressed. Administrators questioned costs, which were contextualized against turnover and retention. Staff shared their own stories, juggling, hiding, struggling under policies that demanded they be less than whole. 3 hours later, they had the framework for something new. Not perfect, not complete, but a genuine step toward institutional change that recognized humanity rather than suppressing it. As the meeting adjourned, Margaret caught Ethan's arm. "That was powerful, thank you. Thank you for making space for it. I should have made space sooner. Should have seen sooner." Margaret's expression was rueful. "My mother is coming home from rehab tomorrow. I'm taking a half day to settle her in, and for the first time in my career, I'm not hiding it or feeling guilty about it. That's because of you." "It's because of you being willing to change," Ethan corrected gently. "I just provided the catalyst." Either way, things are different now. Better. Friday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, brilliant sunshine, leaves turning gold and red. Ethan finished his morning shift and picked Lily up from school, her excitement palpable. "We're really going to see where you work?" "We really are. You ready?" The drive back to Mercy General felt different with Lily in the car, her questions rapid fire and revealing. What if the sick kids were scary looking? What if she didn't know what to say? What if she made someone feel worse instead of better? "You'll do great," Ethan assured her. "Just be yourself." Kids recognize genuine kindness. Inside the hospital, Lily's hand gripped his tightly as they navigated the corridors. Ethan narrated their path, the cafeteria where he ate lunch, the pharmacy where medications came from, the family waiting room where parents sat during long vigils. The pediatric wing greeted them with its usual symphony of sounds. Amanda was at the nurses' station and lit up when she saw them. "You must be Lily. Your dad talks about you all the time." Lily pressed against Ethan's side, shy but pleased. "He talks about you too. You have 3 kids." "I do, and they drive me crazy, but I love them." Amanda winked. "Just like you probably drive your dad crazy sometimes, right?" A small smile. "Maybe sometimes." Ethan gave Lily a brief tour, showing her where he worked, where supplies were kept, how the patient boards organized information. Then, with permission from parents and patients, he introduced her to Emma. The 8-year-old was having a good day, sitting up in bed with her nebulizer nearby, but not currently needed. "Hi, are you Nurse Ethan's daughter?" "I'm Lily." The shyness was already fading. "Are you the one with the breathing problems?" "Yeah, asthma. It's annoying." Emma patted the bed. "Want to see my coloring book? I'm doing horses." Just like that, they were engrossed in discussion about proper horse coloring. Should they be realistic or fantasy colored? Ethan watched from the doorway, his heart expanding with a feeling he couldn't quite name. This was his world, these 2 pieces of his life intersecting, and they fit together perfectly. Emma's mother pulled him aside. "Your daughter is lovely." "Thank you. She was anxious about me being at work, so I thought seeing it would help." "It's helping Emma too. She gets lonely in here." The woman's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for being so good to her. You have a gift with children." "I learned from the best teacher," Ethan said, looking at Lily. They visited 2 more patients, Tyler, recovering well from his tonsillectomy, and a new admission, a 6-year-old named Sophie with a broken arm who was terrified of everything. Lily approached Sophie with an instinctive gentleness that made Ethan's chest ache with pride. "I broke my arm once too," Lily said, though it was a small lie. "It was scary at first, but the doctors fix it and then it gets better, and see this?" She pointed to the IV in Sophie's hand. "My dad is really good at making those not hurt. He's the best nurse here." Sophie's fear visibly eased. "Really?" "Really. And he can explain everything so it makes sense. Just ask him questions and he'll tell you the truth, but in a way that's not too scary." Ethan had to look away for a moment, overcome. This child, this wise and compassionate 7-year-old, was teaching patients the same trust he'd worked years to build. She was offering comfort born from her own experience of loss and fear, translating it into connection. When they left Sophie's room, Lily looked up at him with shining eyes. "Daddy, I get it now. Why you love working here. You make kids feel better." "That's the goal. And it's okay that you're here sometimes instead of with me, because you're helping other kids who need you too. I understand now." The anxiety that had plagued her all week had transformed into understanding. Seeing his world, meeting the children he cared for, had demystified his absence and given it meaning she could grasp. Margaret appeared at the end of the hallway, pushing an elderly woman in a wheelchair. Her mother, Ethan realized, recognizing the family resemblance despite the age difference. "Mr. Brooks." "Lily, I'd like you to meet my mother, Patricia." "Miss Winters." Ethan shook the older woman's hand gently. "It's good to see you up and about." "Call me Patricia, dear, and thank you for recommending Dr. Harrison. She's wonderful." Patricia's eyes twinkled. "My daughter tells me you're the reason this hospital is finally entering the 21st century with its family policies. I think your daughter deserves the credit for that." "Nonsense. Margaret is brilliant but stubborn. Sometimes she needs someone to hold up a mirror." Patricia looked at Lily. "And who is this lovely young lady?" "I'm Lily Brooks. That's my daddy," Lily pointed proudly. "A lucky daddy indeed." Patricia's gaze moved between Ethan and Margaret. "My daughter was wrong about you, you know. She's admitted it, but I wanted to tell you myself. She was so busy trying to be perfect that she forgot people aren't meant to be perfect. We're meant to be human." Margaret's face colored slightly. "Mom, let me finish. This young man showed you grace when you didn't deserve it, and that changed you, changed this whole place from what I hear. That's worth acknowledging." Patricia squeezed Ethan's hand. "Thank you for helping my daughter remember what matters." The moment stretched, weighted with significance. Then Lily broke it with childish directness. "Ms. Margaret, are you the one who was mean to my daddy about checking his phone?" Ethan winced. "Lily?" "Yes," Margaret said simply, kneeling to Lily's level. "I was. I didn't understand that your daddy checking on you made him a better nurse, not a worse one. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, to him and to you." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a child weighing adult actions. "It's okay. People make mistakes. Daddy says what matters is learning from them. Your daddy is very wise." Margaret stood, but her expression remained open, vulnerable in a way Ethan had never seen. "Thank you for forgiving me." They parted ways, Margaret pushing her mother toward the rehabilitation wing, Ethan and Lily heading for the exit. In the parking lot, Lily skipped ahead, her earlier anxiety completely evaporated. "I like your hospital, Daddy. Can I come back sometime?" "Anytime you want, Lilybug. Anytime you want." The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy. Grocery shopping, park visits, homework help, the comfortable routine of their life together. But underneath ran a current of change, subtle but significant. Lily slept more soundly, her nightmares less frequent. Ethan moved through his days with a lightness he hadn't felt in months. The weight of potential job loss, of forced choices, had lifted, leaving room for something better. Monday morning, he arrived at work to find a memo in his box. The policy changes had been fast-tracked through administration, approved by the board, and would be implemented immediately. Staff caregivers could now designate emergency contacts who could reach them anytime. Phone usage during breaks was explicitly permitted. Flexible scheduling for family needs was available upon request. The language throughout emphasized support rather than restriction, compassion rather than compliance. At the bottom of the memo, a handwritten note from Margaret. "Thank you for not giving up. You changed everything." Ethan posted the memo at the nurses' station where everyone could see it. Within minutes, staff had gathered, reading with expressions ranging from relief to disbelief to quiet tears. "Is this real?" Carlos asked. "Are they actually supporting us instead of threatening us?" "It's real," Ethan confirmed. "Hard fought, but real." Amanda hugged him spontaneously. "You did this, you and your stubborn integrity." "Margaret did this. I just pushed the conversation." "However it happened, thank you." Jennifer wiped her eyes. You have no idea what this means for those of us trying to manage impossible situations. But Ethan did know. He knew exactly what it meant, the difference between constantly looking over your shoulder and being able to breathe freely. The difference between hiding your humanity and being supported in it. The difference between surviving and thriving. The day unfolded with a new energy on the floor, staff moving differently, smiling more easily, the constant low-grade anxiety of potential discipline noticeably absent. Patients sensed it too, children responding to caregivers who felt more present, more relaxed, more wholly themselves. In room 312, Emma was being discharged, her mother packing belongings while Emma bounced with excitement about going home. "Nurse Ethan, I'm going to miss you." "I'll miss you too, sweetheart. But you know what? I bet we don't see each other again for a very long time. Because you're going to stay healthy and strong and keep that asthma under control." "I will. And if I do come back, can Lily visit again?" "Absolutely. She'd love that." Emma hugged him fiercely, this little girl he'd comforted through breathing crises and hospital fears, and Ethan felt the familiar ache of pediatric nursing, the joy of healing mixed with the grief of letting go. The shift ended with Ethan completing his charting in record time, no longer distracted by worry about documentation or surveillance. He texted Lily a photo of the sunset from the hospital window. "Beautiful evening, Lilybug. See you soon." And received back a string of heart emojis and a picture she'd drawn of them together. Walking to his car, Ethan encountered Margaret in the parking lot, also heading home after a long day. "Your mother settling in okay?" he asked. "She is. Complaining about everything, which means she's feeling better." Margaret smiled. "I'm learning to juggle work and caregiving. It's humbling." "It is, but you're doing it. Because you showed me it was possible." Margaret hesitated, then continued. "I wanted to tell you, the board was impressed with the policy presentation. They're considering implementing similar frameworks hospital-wide, not just in pediatrics. You might be asked to consult on the expansion." "I'd be honored." They stood in the fading light, two people who'd been adversaries and were now something approaching friends, united by the shared understanding that came from caring for others while needing care themselves. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said quietly. "How do you do it? Balance everything, stay present for your daughter, maintain excellence at work, not fall apart from the stress?" Ethan thought about that, about the question he'd asked himself countless times in the 3 years since Sarah's death. "Honestly, some days I don't. Some days I survive on coffee and determination. Some days I cry in the shower where Lily can't hear me. But most days, I remember why I'm doing it, to give her a life her mother would be proud of, to honor Sarah's memory by being the parent she knew I could be, to show Lily that love isn't a distraction from life. It's the whole point." Margaret's eyes were suspiciously bright. "That's beautiful. It's true. And it applies to you too, you know. Taking care of your mother, being there for your family, that doesn't make you weak or unprofessional. It makes you human. And humans are what this hospital needs, not robots who clock in and out without attachment or feeling." "When did you become so wise?" "About the time I had to explain death to a 4-year-old and somehow find words that wouldn't break her." Ethan's voice caught slightly. "Loss teaches you what matters. I wouldn't recommend it as a learning method, but it's effective." They said goodnight, each heading to their respective cars, their respective families, their respective lives that were richer now for having intersected and transformed each other. Ethan drove home through familiar streets, the radio playing softly, his mind quiet for once. The crisis had passed. The threat had been averted. More than that, something genuinely good had emerged from the conflict, policy changes that would benefit countless staff members he'd never meet, families he'd never know. All because he'd refused to choose. All because he'd insisted that being a father and being a nurse weren't opposing identities but complementary truths. All because one calm reply, one moment of standing firm in his integrity, had exposed the cracks in a broken system and created space for something better. At home, Lily met him at the door with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about her day, pulling him toward the kitchen where Joan had left dinner warming in the oven. Normal evening routines, precious in their ordinariness, made more precious by how close he'd come to losing them. Later, after dinner and homework and the nightly bedtime ritual, Ethan stood in Lily's doorway watching her sleep. The stuffed elephant was tucked under her arm, her face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight. This was what he'd fought for. This was what made every difficult moment worthwhile. His phone buzzed quietly. A text from Amanda. "Thank you again for everything. My kids and I are grateful." Then Carlos. "You changed the game, man. Respect." Then Jennifer. "Finally feel like I can breathe. Thank you." One by one, messages from colleagues he'd worked with for years, all expressing gratitude for changes that would make their lives measurably better. Ethan read them with a full heart, humbled by the ripple effects of one confrontation, one refusal to compromise his values. He replied to each one simply, "We did this together. This is for all of us." Because that was the truth. Yes, he'd been the catalyst, but Margaret had done the actual changing. The policy committee had done the work. The board had approved the changes, and countless staff members carrying their own burdens had created the need that made the changes necessary. Ethan was just the person who'd been stubborn enough or desperate enough to refuse to accept that caring for his daughter made him less professional. And in that refusal, in that insistence on his own wholeness, he'd accidentally created space for everyone else to be whole too. Standing in his daughter's doorway, watching her breathe, Ethan felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had in months. Not haunting him, not tormenting him with absence, but settling around him like a benediction. She would have been proud, he thought, proud that he'd fought, proud that he'd won, proud that their daughter slept peacefully, secure in her father's love and presence. The crisis was over. The threat had passed, and in the quiet of the Friday evening, with his daughter sleeping and his job secure and the future suddenly full of possibility instead of dread, Ethan allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten was possible. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope that tomorrow might be better than today, that fighting for what was right sometimes actually worked, that one person's courage could indeed change an entire system. He pulled Lily's door nearly closed, leaving it open just enough to hear if she called for him, and went to his own room with a lightness in his chest he'd been missing for far too long. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new balances to strike, new moments of juggling impossible demands. But tonight, he'd simply rest in the knowledge that he'd done what Sarah asked. He'd taken care of their girl, put her first, loved her fiercely and without apology. And somehow, miraculously, the world had rewarded that love instead of punishing it. The weeks that followed carried a quality of transformation that went deeper than policy changes or workplace dynamics. Ethan noticed it first in the small things, the way colleagues lingered at the nurse's station, sharing stories about their children without fear of judgment, the photos that began appearing on desks that had previously been kept carefully impersonal, the casual mentions of school plays and doctor's appointments that no longer needed to be whispered or hidden. Margaret implemented the new policies with the same rigorous attention to detail she'd once applied to documentation violations, but now that energy served a different purpose. She created a staff support bulletin board where people could post requests for shift coverage during family events. She established a monthly caregiver support group that met during lunch hours, providing space for nurses and staff to share strategies and encouragement. She even started a mentorship program pairing experienced parent nurses with newer staff struggling to balance work and family. "You've created a monster," Ethan told her one afternoon, watching her organize yet another initiative. "A really good monster, but still." Margaret laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent. "I spent years using my organizational skills to enforce compliance. Turns out they work even better when applied to actually helping people. Who knew?" "Anyone who'd been paying attention?" Ethan replied, but he said it gently. Margaret's transformation was genuine, her commitment to change absolute, and he respected the courage it took to admit error and choose differently. The real test came 6 weeks after the policy implementation, when a crisis emerged that would put everything to the test. It started with a phone call that came through the hospital switchboard at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, patched through to the pediatric wing with unusual urgency. "Ethan Brooks?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, tight with stress. "This is Principal Chen from Lily's school. We have a situation." Ethan's blood went cold. "What kind of situation?" "There's been an incident on the playground. Another student pushed Lily off the climbing structure. She's conscious and alert, but she hit her head and we've called an ambulance. They're taking her to Mercy General's emergency department. The world tilted. Ethan gripped the counter, his nurse's training warring with his father's panic. Head injury, ambulance, his daughter. I'm coming down to the ER now. Is she asking for me? She's scared but holding it together. The paramedics are with her now. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her Daddy's coming right now. Ethan was already moving, grabbing his phone, his mind racing through possibilities. Concussion protocol, CT scan, observation, the 1,000 things that could go wrong with pediatric head trauma. Amanda looked up from her charting. Ethan, what's wrong? Lily, playground accident, head injury. They're bringing her to our ER. The words came out staccato, clipped by fear. Go! Amanda was already reaching for his patient files. I've got your floor. Go be with your daughter. Ethan ran, not caring about hospital decorum or the no-running policies, his footsteps echoing through corridors that suddenly felt endless. The elevator took forever. When he finally burst through the ER doors, the triage nurse recognized him immediately. Brooks, your daughter just arrived. Bay 3. He found her on a gurney, so small against the white sheets, a cervical collar immobilizing her neck, her face streaked with tears and dirt. But her eyes were open, tracking movement, and when she saw him, she started crying harder. Daddy! I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Ethan moved to her side, his hands automatically checking, pupils equal and reactive, no obvious deformity, good color despite the crying, the nurse's assessment warring with the father's terror. Can you tell me what hurts? My head and my arm, and I'm scared. Lily's voice was small, frightened in a way that broke something in Ethan's chest. I know you're scared, but you're in the best place and I'm not leaving you, okay? Not for 1 second. He looked up at the ER physician, Dr. Marcus Chen, someone Ethan had worked with dozens of times. Marcus, what are we looking at? Witnesses say she fell about 6 feet, landed on her left side, hit her head on the ground. She was unconscious for maybe 10 seconds, then came to disoriented but responsive. We're taking her for CT in a few minutes, but vitals are stable. Neuroexam looks good, probably a mild concussion, but we need to rule out anything more serious. Probably. The word that haunted every medical professional, the space between reassurance and catastrophe. Ethan had used it countless times with parents, always meaning it kindly, always hoping it would prove true. Now he was on the other side, hearing it applied to his own child, and it offered no comfort whatsoever. Can I go with her for the scan? Of course. We'll take good care of her, Ethan. You know we will. He did know. Intellectually, professionally, he knew Lily was in excellent hands. But knowing didn't stop the fear that clawed at his throat, the visceral terror of watching his daughter hurt and being unable to fix it immediately. They took her to radiology, Ethan walking alongside the gurney, one hand holding hers, the other resting on her shoulder. In the CT room, he stood behind the protective barrier, watching the machine rotate around his daughter's small body, and felt Sarah's absence like a physical wound. She should be here. They should be facing this together, dividing the fear between them, supporting each other through the awful waiting. But Sarah wasn't here, would never be here again, and Ethan was alone with the weight of parental terror that threatened to crush him if he let it. The scan took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. When they wheeled Lily back to the ER bay, Margaret Winters was waiting there, her face creased with concern. I heard what happened. How is she? Waiting on CT results. Ethan's voice sounded distant to his own ears, shock setting in now that the immediate crisis had passed. She's stable, probably just a concussion. I've cleared your schedule for the rest of the week. Whatever she needs, however long recovery takes, you're covered. The simple generosity of it, the assumption that of course he would prioritize his daughter, of course the hospital would support that choice, made Ethan's eyes sting. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is exactly what the policy is for. Margaret moved closer to the bed, looking down at Lily with genuine compassion. Hello, Lily. I'm Miss Margaret. Your daddy works with me. You're the one who said sorry, Lily said, her voice slightly slurred from pain medication they'd given her for the headache. That's right, and I'm very sorry you got hurt today, but your daddy is going to take excellent care of you. He always does. Dr. Chen returned with the CT results, and Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief at the words, no intracranial bleeding, no skull fracture, consistent with mild concussion. They'd keep her for observation for a few hours, then she could go home with strict instructions about monitoring and rest. You dodged a bullet, Marcus said quietly, away from Lily's hearing. 6 feet onto hard ground. She's lucky it wasn't worse. I know. Ethan did know, had seen enough pediatric trauma to understand exactly how lucky, but knowing didn't make the fear retroactively disappear. Over the next 4 hours, the pediatric wing staff rotated through the ER to check on Lily, bringing coloring books and stuffed animals and stories designed to distract a frightened 7-year-old. Amanda came with Lily's favorite juice boxes. Carlos brought a balloon animal he'd clearly bought from the hospital gift shop. Jennifer stopped by with a teddy bear wearing scrubs. This is Nurse Bear, she told Lily seriously. He's going to help you recover at home. He's very good at his job. Lily clutched the bear, managing a small smile despite her pain. Thank you. Watching his colleagues rally around his daughter, seeing the same compassion they showed their patients extended to his family, Ethan felt overwhelmed by gratitude. This was what Margaret's policy changes had created, not just permission to acknowledge family, but a culture where caring for each other's children was natural, expected, celebrated. When they finally discharged Lily that evening, Ethan carried her to the car with exquisite care, her head resting against his shoulder, the teddy bear tucked under her good arm. The drive home was slow and careful, every bump in the road making him wince in sympathy. Joan met them at the door, her face pale with worry. Oh, baby girl, let's get you settled. They created a recovery nest on the couch. Pillows, blankets, the TV positioned for easy viewing. Lily drifted in and out of sleep, concussed and medicated, while Ethan kept watch with the vigilance of someone who'd learned the hard way that life could change in an instant. You should rest, Joan said gently. I can watch her for a while. I can't. Ethan's voice was raw. Every time I close my eyes, I see her falling. See her unconscious on the ground. See all the ways this could have been so much worse. But it wasn't worse. She's going to be fine. This time. But what about next time? What if I'm at work and something happens and I can't get to her fast enough? What if... He stopped, recognizing the spiral, the what-if thinking he'd warned Lily against. Joan sat beside him, taking his hand. You can't protect her from everything, Ethan. You can only love her and do your best and trust that's enough. What if it's not? Then you deal with it when it happens, but you can't live in fear of every possible disaster. Sarah wouldn't want that for you, and it's not fair to Lily. Ethan knew she was right, knew that wrapping Lily in bubble wrap and never letting her out of his sight wasn't parenting, it was prison. But the fear was real and visceral and demanded acknowledgement. That night, he slept on the floor next to the couch, waking every hour to check on Lily per concussion protocol. Each time, he gently roused her, asked the standard questions. What's your name? Where are you? What day is it? And watched her sleepy irritation at being woken with profound relief. Irritation meant normal brain function. Irritation meant she was okay. By morning, Lily was more alert, complaining about her headache and the unfairness of not being allowed screen time. Good signs, both of them. Ethan made her favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, and watched her eat with an appetite that reassured him more than any medical test. Daddy, why do you keep staring at me? Because I'm glad you're okay. Because you scared me yesterday. Lily considered this, chewing thoughtfully. I scared me too. But you came really fast, like super fast. The nurse said you ran through the hospital. I did. Nothing was going to stop me from getting to you. I knew you'd come. Even when I was scared, I knew. She paused, then added with the brutal honesty of children, I wanted Mommy too, though. Is that okay? The words pierced Ethan's heart. Of course it's okay, sweetheart. I want Mommy too. Every day, but especially on scary days. Do you think she knows what happened? Like from heaven or wherever she is? Ethan chose his words carefully, navigating the space between his own uncertain beliefs and what Lily needed to hear.
I think if there's any way for her to know, she does. And I think she's proud of how brave you were. I cried a lot. Being brave doesn't mean not crying, remember? It means being scared but getting through it anyway. You did that. Over the next few days, Lily recovered with the resilience of childhood. The headaches faded, the bruises yellowed and disappeared, and by the end of the week she was begging to go back to school. But something had shifted in Ethan, a recalibration of his understanding of risk and safety and control. He returned to work the following Monday to find a card on his locker, thinking of you and Lily, signed by what looked like half the hospital staff. Inside were gift cards to restaurants, offers of babysitting, notes of encouragement and support. The community that Margaret's policies had helped foster was showing its strength. Margaret found him at the nurse's station mid-morning. "How's Lily?" "Back to normal, mostly. Still bruised, but healing well." Ethan managed to smile. "Thanks again for the flexibility with my schedule." "How are you?" Margaret's question was pointed, seen past the professional veneer to the shaken father underneath. "Honestly, struggling a bit, keeps hitting me at odd moments, how close we came to something really bad, how fragile everything is." "That's normal. Trauma affects the people who love the patient, not just the patient themselves." Margaret leaned against the counter. "Can I share something? When my mother fell and broke her hip, I had nightmares for weeks about finding her unconscious, about being too late, about all the ways I'd failed to protect her. The guilt and fear were overwhelming." "How did you handle it?" "Therapy, actually. Started seeing someone to process the caregiver anxiety. It's been helpful." She paused. "The hospital has an EAP, Employee Assistance Program, that includes free counseling sessions. Might be worth exploring." The suggestion surprised Ethan. The old Margaret would never have recommended therapy, would have seen it as weakness or self-indulgence. This version understood that caring for others required caring for yourself. "I'll think about it. Thanks." The shift progressed normally until early afternoon, when Thomas Chen appeared at the pediatric wing looking official and slightly uncomfortable. "Ethan, do you have a minute? There's someone who'd like to speak with you." Curious, Ethan followed him to the administrative conference room. Inside, he found an unfamiliar woman in a business suit, her expression warm but professional. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Dr. Sarah Okafor from the Regional Healthcare Administration. I've been hearing remarkable things about the policy changes implemented here at Mercy General, and I wanted to speak with you directly about your role in that transformation." Ethan shot a questioning look at Thomas, who shrugged slightly. "Dr. Okafor is evaluating innovative workplace policies across the region. Margaret recommended she speak with you." "I don't know that I did anything remarkable," Ethan said carefully. "I just refused to sign a warning that didn't make sense. According to the documentation I've reviewed, you did considerably more than that. You articulated a compelling case for how personal caregiving responsibilities enhance rather than diminish professional capability. You demonstrated that with practical examples, and when given the opportunity for revenge against the supervisor who threatened your job, you instead offered grace and assistance." Dr. Okafor smiled. "That's the kind of leadership that creates cultural change." "I'm not a leader. I'm just a nurse who happens to be a single father." "Those aren't mutually exclusive categories, Mr. Brooks. In fact, I'd argue that your experience as both gives you unique insight into the challenges healthcare workers face." She opened a folder, pulling out documents. "I'm here to ask if you'd be willing to participate in a regional task force on healthcare worker retention and support. Your perspective would be invaluable." Ethan blinked, processing. "A task force? I work bedside. I don't do policy work." "You already did policy work when you challenged the status quo here. This would just be formalizing that contribution and extending it to other facilities." Dr. Okafor leaned forward. "We're losing good healthcare workers at alarming rates: burnout, impossible work-life balance, lack of institutional support. Your story demonstrates that there are practical solutions. We need voices like yours at the decision-making table." "I'd need to think about it. My first priority is always Lily." "Of course. The task force meets quarterly, with most work done via video conference. We've designed it specifically to be accessible to working parents and caregivers." She slid a packet across the table.
Review the information, discuss it with your family, and let me know. We'd love to have you. After she left, Ethan sat with Thomas in the conference room, staring at the packet. This is surreal, Ethan said finally. 6 weeks ago, I was facing termination. Now I'm being recruited for regional policy work? That's what happens when you stand up for something that matters. People notice. Thomas smiled. For what it's worth, I think you should do it. Your voice needs to be heard beyond Mercy General. But what about my patients? What about showing Lily that speaking up for what's right can lead to positive change? What about using your experience to help thousands of other healthcare workers who are struggling the same way you were? Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. You've already proven you can balance multiple responsibilities. This is just one more. Ethan took the packet home that evening, setting it on the kitchen table while he made dinner. Lily, recovered enough to be her usual curious self, immediately pounced on it. What's this? Some people want me to help change hospital rules in lots of places, not just my hospital. Like what you did with Ms. Margaret. Similar, yeah. Lily flipped through pages she couldn't fully understand, then looked up at him with serious eyes. You should do it. Why do you say that? Because you helped Ms. Margaret understand about families. And you helped me not be scared of your hospital. And if you can help other kids' parents too, that's good. That's what helpers do. The simple wisdom undid him. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always listen. She grinned, then added, but you have to promise you'll still have time for me. Always, Lilybug. You come first. You always come first. That weekend, Ethan called Joan to discuss the opportunity. She listened to his concerns, the time commitment, the pressure, the fear of overextending himself, with patient understanding. What does your gut tell you? She asked. That this is important, that if my experience can help other people, I have a responsibility to share it. But also that I'm terrified of failing, of taking on too much, of somehow letting Lily down. You won't let her down. You've never let her down, even in your hardest moments. Joan's voice carried absolute conviction. And Ethan, Sarah would tell you to do it. She always believed in using your pain for purpose, turning your struggles into service. This is exactly that. So Ethan said yes to the task force, joining a group of healthcare workers, administrators, and policy experts committed to making the industry more sustainable for its workforce. The first meeting was in 2 weeks, giving him time to prepare, to read the research, to formulate his thoughts into something coherent and useful. The night before the meeting, he sat at the kitchen table reviewing his notes while Lily did homework beside him. The domesticity of it, father and daughter working in comfortable parallel, felt profound. This was what he was fighting for, not just for himself, but for every parent trying to be present for their children while also serving their patients. Daddy, can I ask you something? Lily's voice interrupted his reading. Sure, sweetheart. Are you happy? Like really happy, not just pretend happy? The question caught him off guard. What makes you ask that? You seem different lately, less worried. You smile more. She twisted her pencil between her fingers. I like it when you're happy. Ethan set down his notes, giving her his full attention. I am happy, Lily. Happier than I've been in a long time. Work is better. You're doing great. And I feel like maybe we're figuring this out. This life of ours. I think we're doing good too, even with the scary stuff like my fall. Even with the scary stuff, Ethan agreed. Because we got through it together, right? That's what we do. The task force meeting was held via video conference, faces appearing in squares on Ethan's laptop screen. Dr. Okafor facilitated, introducing participants from hospitals across 3 states. Ethan recognized the same exhaustion in their faces that he'd felt for so long, the bone-deep weariness of people trying to be enough in systems that demanded too much. When it came time for him to speak, to share his story, Ethan found the words flowing naturally. He talked about Sarah's death, about learning to parent alone, about the impossible choice he'd been forced to make between his daughter and his career. He described Margaret's initial rigidity and her ultimate transformation. He explained how policy changes had rippled through Mercy General, creating a culture where humanity was valued rather than suppressed. The thing is, he concluded, we can't keep treating healthcare workers like machines. We're humans caring for humans, and that requires us to be whole people, not fractured versions of ourselves who hide our families and our needs and our humanity. When we support caregivers in being whole, patient care improves, retention improves, everything improves. It's not complicated, it's just hard, because it requires institutions to prioritize people over policy. The chat filled with agreement, with shared experiences, with the collective recognition of people who'd been struggling in isolation finally finding community. One nurse from Ohio typed, "I was written up 3 times last year for taking calls from my son's school. I'm a single mother. What was I supposed to do?" Another from Kentucky shared, "I almost quit nursing entirely because I couldn't handle the guilt of never being available for my kids. Only reason I stayed was finding a small community hospital with a flexible supervisor." Story after story, each one a variation on the same theme: good people forced to choose, struggling under systems that treated compassion as a liability. Dr. Okafor let the sharing continue for nearly an hour before refocusing the group. What we're seeing here is a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. Individual supervisors like Margaret Winters can make a difference, but we need broader policy frameworks. That's what this task force will develop: model policies that can be adapted by different institutions, best practices for supporting healthcare worker well-being, metrics for measuring success. The work was ambitious, complex, and deeply necessary. Ethan left the meeting energized despite the late hour, feeling connected to something larger than his individual struggle. Over the following weeks, he balanced his bedside nursing with task force work, finding a rhythm that felt sustainable. Lily adapted to occasional evenings when Daddy was on video calls, learning to be quiet during his meetings, bringing him snacks during breaks. Joan helped with logistics, covering when Ethan's schedule got complicated. Margaret became an unexpected ally in the task force work, offering insights from the administrative perspective, sharing Mercy General's implementation data, and demonstrating that genuine change was possible even in large bureaucratic systems.
"You know what's funny?" she said during one of their planning sessions. "I thought being rigid made me professional. Turns out being human makes me better at everything." "Character development," Ethan replied with a grin. "Very impressive." "Learn from the best." Margaret's expression turned serious. "I want you to know, watching you stand up for what was right, watching you refuse to compromise your integrity even when it would have been easier, that changed my life. Not just my management style, but my whole life. I'm closer to my mother now. I'm more honest with myself. I'm happier. I'm glad. But you did the actual changing. I just provided the catalyst. Sometimes that's all people need. Someone to hold up a mirror and say, there's another way." She paused. "My mother wants to meet Lily properly, by the way. She's been talking about the brave little girl whose father works miracles." "Hardly miracles, just nursing." "To the people you help, it's the same thing." The months rolled forward, autumn transitioning into winter, the task force making steady progress on their policy recommendations. Mercy General became a case study in successful implementation, with other hospitals sending representatives to observe and learn. Ethan found himself giving presentations, sharing his story with larger audiences, becoming, much to his own surprise, a voice for healthcare worker advocacy. It was strange and humbling and occasionally overwhelming, but it also felt right. Sarah had always said his empathy was his superpower. Now he was using it to create systemic change. Lily thrived through it all, her anxiety about Ethan's work fading as she grew more secure in their routine. She made friends with some of the pediatric patients during her occasional hospital visits, becoming a regular volunteer presence that delighted both staff and patients. One afternoon, Ethan found her in Emma's room. The 8-year-old was back for another respiratory crisis, the two girls giggling over a shared coloring book. "Lily's teaching me to color horses properly," Emma explained. "Fantasy colors are way better than realistic ones." "I have to agree," Ethan said, examining their purple and teal creations. "These are definitely superior horses." Watching them together, Ethan felt the familiar ache of bittersweet emotion, grief for what Lily had lost, gratitude for what they'd built, hope for what lay ahead. This life wasn't the one he'd planned. It wasn't the 2-parent household Sarah had envisioned, but it was good. It was whole. It was enough. That evening, walking to the car after his shift, Ethan found Margaret in the parking lot again,
this time struggling with an armload of files. "Let me help," he offered, taking half the stack. "Thanks. Policy review documents for the board. They want quarterly updates now." That's a good sign, means they're taking it seriously. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Margaret spoke again. "I've been thinking about the award gala next month, the Excellence in Pediatric Nursing Award you're receiving. I'd like to say a few words when I present it, if that's okay with you." "Of course, though I still think the award is excessive." "You think wrong. You've transformed this hospital and contributed to regional healthcare policy. That's award-worthy by any standard." She loaded the files into her car, then turned to face him directly. "I want to publicly acknowledge what I did, how I almost fired an exceptional nurse because I was too rigid to see clearly. I think the story needs to be told, so people understand how close we came to losing you and how much that would have cost us." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I don't need a public apology, Margaret. We've moved past that. It's not for you. It's for everyone else who's watching, who needs to see that admitting error and changing course is possible. That's the real story, not your excellence, though that's certainly part of it, but the transformation that happened when someone had the courage to challenge the system and someone else had the courage to listen." The gala was still 3 weeks away, but Ethan found himself thinking about it as the days passed. The formal recognition, the public acknowledgement, the attention, all of it made him vaguely uncomfortable. He'd never sought spotlight or acclaim, had only ever wanted to do his job well and take care of his daughter. But perhaps that was exactly why the recognition mattered, Margaret's words echoing in his mind. Not for him, but for everyone watching, everyone struggling, everyone wondering if speaking up would cost them everything or change anything at all. The night of the gala arrived with winter rain tapping against windows. Ethan dressed in the suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, the only formal wear he owned, and tried not to feel like an imposter. Joan had convinced him to let Lily attend the awards portion of the evening, arguing that she should see her father honored for his work. They arrived at the hotel ballroom to find it transformed. Elegant lighting, round tables dressed in white linens, a stage at the front with the hospital's logo projected behind it. Ethan's colleagues had claimed a table near the front, greeting him with hugs and congratulations. Lily was wide-eyed, taking in the formal setting with awe. "Daddy, this is fancy." "It is. You look very beautiful, by the way." She did, in the navy dress Joan had helped her pick out, her hair pulled back with clips that sparkled under the lights. "You look handsome, like a prince." "I don't know about that, but thank you." The evening progressed through dinner and preliminary awards. Ethan's stomach tightened with nerves as the Excellence in Pediatric Nursing Award approached. When Margaret finally took the stage to present it, the room quieted. "Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Margaret Winters, nursing supervisor for pediatrics at Mercy General. I'm here to present the Excellence in Pediatric Nursing Award, but first I need to tell you a story." She described the confrontation in her office, the written warning, her rigid interpretation of policy. She spoke honestly about her own biases, her fear, her initial inability to see beyond rule enforcement to human need. "I was preparing to terminate Ethan Brooks for being a good father," Margaret said, her voice carrying across the room. "I was so focused on compliance that I couldn't see excellence even when it was standing right in front of me. And if he hadn't stood up for himself, if he hadn't refused to compromise his integrity, I would have fired one of the best nurses this hospital has ever employed." She paused, her eyes finding Ethan's across the room. But he did stand up. He calmly, clearly, compassionately explained why being a parent made him better at his job, not worse. And when I had my own family emergency, when I suddenly needed exactly the grace I'd refused to extend to him, he helped me anyway. That's the kind of person Ethan Brooks is. Margaret's voice strengthened. The policy changes we've implemented at Mercy General, the improvements in staff satisfaction and retention, the culture shift toward supporting whole human beings instead of demanding fractured compliance, all of that started because one nurse refused to accept that loving his daughter made him a liability. So when we talk about excellence in pediatric nursing, we're not just talking about clinical skills or patient outcomes, though Ethan excels at both. We're talking about the courage to insist on your own humanity, and in doing so, create space for everyone else's humanity too. The room erupted in applause. Ethan stood on shaking legs, making his way to the stage where Margaret waited with a plaque and a smile that held genuine warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly, embracing him briefly before stepping back. Ethan faced the crowd, his prepared remarks suddenly feeling inadequate. He set them aside and spoke from the heart instead. "I don't feel like I did anything extraordinary. I was just a father trying to be present for his daughter while also doing the job I love. That shouldn't be revolutionary, but somehow it was. And that tells us something important about our healthcare system. We've normalized impossible choices. We've accepted that caring for others means sacrificing care for ourselves and our families. We've built institutions that demand we be less than fully human." He found Lily in the crowd, her small face glowing with pride. "My daughter lost her mother 3 years ago. That loss taught both of us what matters, not perfect compliance with arbitrary rules, but presence, connection, love. Those same qualities make me a better nurse. They help me understand frightened children and worried parents. They remind me daily that every patient is someone's entire world." Ethan held up the plaque. "This award isn't just mine. It belongs to every healthcare worker juggling impossible demands. It belongs to Margaret Winters for having the courage to change. It belongs to my colleagues who supported me when I needed it. And it belongs to my daughter, Lily, who taught me that being a good father and being a good nurse aren't competing priorities. They're complementary truths." More applause, and then Ethan was returning to his seat where Lily launched herself at him. "That was perfect, Daddy." "You think so?" "I know so." She hugged him fiercely. "Mommy would be so proud." The words broke something open in Ethan's chest. 3 years of grief and determination and love spilling out in tears he didn't bother to hide. Joan reached over, gripping his hand, her own eyes wet. "She would be," Joan whispered. "She is." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations, colleagues sharing how the policy changes had impacted their lives, administrators from other hospitals asking questions about implementation, strangers approaching to say the story had moved them. Driving home through rain-dark streets, Lily asleep in the back seat, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Not closure exactly, but a kind of peace. He'd survived the worst and built something good from the rubble. He'd stood up for what mattered, and somehow, miraculously, won. At home, he carried Lily to bed without waking her, tucking her in with the stuffed elephant and Nurse Bear keeping watch. The award plaque sat on the kitchen counter, catching streetlight through the window. Ethan stood in the quiet apartment, in the life he'd built from grief and determination, and let himself feel grateful. For Lily, for colleagues who'd become family, for Margaret's transformation, for the ripple effects of one calm reply that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new balances to strike. But tonight, he simply stood in the peace of enough. Enough love, enough courage, enough hope to face whatever came next. The months following the gala brought a transformation that extended far beyond Mercy General's walls. The Regional Task Force published their first set of recommended policies in early spring, drawing national attention from healthcare organizations hungry for solutions to workforce retention crises. Ethan found himself quoted in industry publications, invited to speak at nursing conferences, his story becoming shorthand for the broader movement toward humanizing healthcare workplaces. But the most profound changes were the ones that happened quietly, in daily moments that would never make headlines. Like the Tuesday morning when Amanda brought her youngest daughter to work during a childcare emergency, and instead of hiding in the break room, she sat openly at the nurse's station doing homework while her mother completed rounds. Or the afternoon when Carlos's mother had a doctor's appointment and he simply adjusted his schedule without fear, texting the team with casual confidence that his absence would be covered and understood. The culture had shifted so completely that new staff arriving at Mercy General were often surprised by how openly people discussed their families, how naturally personal and professional lives intertwined. What had once required courage now simply required honesty. 6 months after the award ceremony, on a bright Saturday morning in late spring, Ethan woke to find Lily already up and dressed, bouncing with an energy that signaled something important was happening. "It's family day at the hospital today, remember?" She practically vibrated with excitement. "We get to do the whole tour and meet everyone and show all the families what you do." Ethan had indeed remembered. The Family Day initiative was Margaret's latest project, a quarterly event where staff could bring their families to the hospital for tours, activities, and community building. It was part celebration, part education, and entirely about reinforcing that the people who worked at Mercy General had rich, full lives beyond their shifts. I remember. But it doesn't start for 3 hours, Lilybug. What do you say we make pancakes first? They spent the morning in comfortable routine, Joan joining them for breakfast and offering to help set up the pediatric wing's activity stations. By the time they arrived at the hospital, the parking lot was already filling with families, children running ahead of parents, teenagers looking simultaneously bored and curious, spouses and partners chatting in clusters. The main entrance had been transformed with balloons and welcome banners. Margaret stood near the registration table, directing traffic with clipboard efficiency. But she was smiling in a way that would have been unimaginable a year ago. When she spotted Ethan and Lily, she waved them over. Perfect timing. Lily, I have a special assignment for you, if you're interested. We need someone to help guide families through the pediatric wing, someone who knows the space and can explain things from a kid's perspective. Think you can handle it? Lily's eyes went wide. Really? I can be like a tour guide? Absolutely. I'll pair you with Nurse Amanda's daughter, Sophie. She's been asking to help too. Watching Lily take on the role with serious enthusiasm, explaining to wide-eyed younger children about the colorful murals in the hallways and the special call buttons that let kids talk to nurses, Ethan felt Sarah's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. Their daughter was confident, compassionate, comfortable in the space that had once frightened her. She'd taken her own fear and transformed it into service, just like her father had. The day unfolded with remarkable smoothness. Families toured different departments, children tried on scrubs and played with decommissioned medical equipment. Spouses finally saw where their partners spent long hours. In the pediatric wing, current patients who were well enough participated in activities alongside staff families, the boundaries between caregiver and cared for blurring into simple human connection. Emma was there, stable enough now to be managing her asthma with outpatient care, no longer a frequent admission. She and Lily had maintained their friendship through the months, occasional playdates and regular texts creating a bond that transcended their initial meeting in a hospital room. My dad's a teacher, Emma told a group of children during the tour. But Lily's dad is a nurse, which is basically a superhero who works in a hospital instead of fighting crime. Not a superhero, Ethan protested, overhearing. R2, Lily insisted. You save people. That's what superheroes do. The logic was unassailable, at least to 7-year-olds. Ethan surrendered with a laugh, letting the children maintain their heroic narrative. Around midday, as families gathered in the cafeteria for lunch, Dr. Okafor arrived with a camera crew and a documentary filmmaker. She found Ethan helping Lily navigate the buffet line. I hope this isn't intrusive, she said by way of greeting. But we're creating a short documentary about the task force's work and the real-world impact of policy changes. Mercy General is our primary case study. Would you be willing to do an interview? Ethan glanced at Lily, who was already nodding enthusiastically. Can I be in it too? We'd love that, the filmmaker said, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an easy manner. Family perspectives are essential to the story. They set up in a quiet conference room, professional lights softening the institutional space. The filmmaker, whose name was Rachel, started with basic questions. How long had Ethan been nursing? What drew him to pediatrics? What was his family situation? Then she moved into deeper territory. Tell me about the moment you realized you might lose your job for being a present father. Ethan described Margaret's office, the spreadsheet of violations, the impossible choice being forced upon him. Lily sat beside him, listening to parts of the story she'd only understood in fragments before. I was terrified, Ethan admitted. Not just of losing income or health insurance, though those were real concerns, but of the message it would send to Lily, that loving her was something I needed to hide, that being her father made me somehow less professional. I couldn't accept that. Not for me, and not for what it would teach her about her own worth. So you refused to sign the warning, Rachel prompted. I did, and I honestly didn't know what would happen. I'd prepared myself for termination, had started looking at other positions, other hospitals. But then something unexpected happened. He described Margaret's emergency, his offer to help, the transformation that followed. Lily reached over and took his hand, squeezing it in wordless support. What would you say to other healthcare workers facing similar situations? Rachel asked. Ethan considered the question carefully. I'd say you're not alone. I'd say the system is broken, but it can be fixed. I'd say that standing up for yourself is scary but necessary, and that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, courage is rewarded. Most importantly, I'd say that being a whole person makes you better at your job, not worse. Your humanity is your greatest asset, not a liability to be managed. Rachel turned to Lily. What about you, sweetheart? What was it like having a dad who had to fight to keep his job? Lily thought about it with the seriousness she brought to important questions. I didn't understand all of it when it was happening. I just knew Daddy was stressed and I was worried. But now I think it's good that he stood up, because it helped other kids' parents too. And it showed me that sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared. Your dad says you teach him a lot about bravery. We teach each other, Lily said simply. That's what families do. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, capturing stories of transformation, moments of connection, the practical realities of balancing caregiving with patient care. When they finished, Rachel looked genuinely moved. This is powerful stuff. Thank you both for your honesty. Back in the cafeteria, the family day celebration was in full swing. Ethan found Margaret sitting with her mother, Patricia, who was now walking with just a cane, her recovery from hip surgery nearly complete. How's the documentary going? Margaret asked. Emotionally exhausting, but good, I think. Rachel seems to really understand what we're trying to accomplish. Patricia patted the seat beside her. Sit, dear. Tell me how you're managing with all this attention. It must be overwhelming. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. I'm just a bedside nurse. All this speaking and policy work and documentary filming, it's not what I signed up for. But it's where you're needed, Patricia said gently. My daughter tells me you've helped create real change, not just here, but across the region. That's rare and valuable. Don't diminish it just because it makes you uncomfortable. She's right, Margaret added. And speaking of change, I have news. The board approved expanding the caregiver support programs hospital-wide. We're also implementing paid family leave policies that exceed state requirements. This started in pediatrics, but it's becoming institutional culture. That's incredible. It's necessary. We were hemorrhaging good staff because we treated them like interchangeable parts instead of human beings. You showed us a better way. Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. Can I ask you something personal? Do you ever regret how hard you had to fight? Do you wish it had been easier? Ethan watched Lily across the room, showing a toddler how to properly hug a teddy bear wearing scrubs. I wish I hadn't had to fight at all. I wish the system already valued what it should. But given that the fight was necessary, I'm glad I didn't back down. And I'm grateful it led to change, instead of just costing me my career. We're the ones who should be grateful, Patricia interjected. You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for everyone who comes after you. That's heroism, whether you want to claim the label or not. The afternoon progressed into a celebration that felt genuinely joyful. Staff members who'd been struggling in isolation discovered they had allies and support systems. Families who'd only heard about the hospital secondhand saw the actual environment where their loved ones worked. Children who'd been anxious about parents' absences gained understanding and connection. As the event wound down, Ethan found himself standing in the pediatric wing hallway with a group of colleagues, all of them watching their families interact with the ease of people who no longer had to compartmentalize their lives. Carlos clapped him on the shoulder. You know what's wild? A year ago, I was hiding phone calls with my mother's care facility. Now I'm bringing her here for Family Day, introducing her to my work family. That shift, from hiding to celebrating, that's because of you. Not just me, Ethan protested. Margaret did the actual policy work. After you showed her why it mattered, Amanda chimed in. Don't minimize your impact, Ethan. You changed lives, plural, including mine. Jennifer nodded agreement. I was ready to leave nursing entirely. The custody battle, the stress, the feeling like I was failing at everything, it was too much. But now I have support, flexibility, understanding. I'm staying in a career I love because you made space for people like me to exist in it. The weight of their gratitude settled over Ethan, humbling and overwhelming. He'd thought his fight was personal, individual, contained. He hadn't fully grasped how many people had been watching, hoping, needing someone to challenge the system successfully. That evening, after they'd said goodbye to the last families and helped clean up the celebration debris, Ethan and Lily walked to their car through the golden light of early evening. The hospital building rose behind them, familiar and transformed, a place that had nearly cost Ethan everything and had instead become the epicenter of meaningful change. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think Mommy knows about all this? About how you helped people and won the award and everything?" The question caught Ethan mid-stride. They didn't talk about Sarah as often anymore, not because they'd forgotten, but because grief had evolved from sharp edges to gentle ache, from constant presence to occasional visitor. "I'd like to think she does," Ethan said carefully, "and I think she'd be proud. Not just of the award or the policy work, but of how we've taken care of each other. That was her biggest concern, that you'd be okay, that I'd be okay, that we'd figure out how to be a family even with her gone." "Are we okay?" Lily asked. "Because sometimes I still get sad about her." "Being sad sometimes doesn't mean you're not okay. It means you had someone worth missing. We can be both okay and sad, happy and grieving. Life's complicated like that." Lily considered this, then nodded. "I think we're more okay than sad now. Is that bad?" "It's beautiful, sweetheart. It means we're healing. It means we're living. That's what Mommy wanted for us." The drive home took them through neighborhoods where spring was asserting itself in flowering trees and greening lawns. Ethan noticed details he'd been too stressed to see in previous seasons. Children playing in yards, families walking together, the simple ordinariness of life unfolding without crisis. At home, they found Joan preparing dinner, the apartment filled with cooking smells that meant comfort and continuity. She listened to their stories about Family Day with obvious delight, asking questions that showed genuine interest in Lily's tour guide adventures. "You should have seen her," Ethan told Joan, completely confident, explaining everything like a seasoned professional. "I was so proud." "Of course you were. She's remarkable. Wonder where she gets that." Joan's smile was knowing. After dinner, while Lily was in the bath, Joan pulled Ethan aside. "I've been thinking about something, about Sarah's life insurance policy and the college fund we set up." Ethan tensed slightly. Money conversations always carried weight, reminder of how precarious their security sometimes felt despite his stable employment. "It's grown more than expected," Joan continued. "And I was thinking, you've been doing all this advocacy work, all these speaking engagements, mostly without compensation. What if we use some of the fund to support that work? Pay for travel, compensate for missed shifts, maybe even let you reduce your hospital hours slightly to focus on the policy work that's making such a difference?" "I couldn't. That money is for Lily's education, and Lily's education will still be fully funded. This is extra, unexpected growth. Sarah would want it used for good, and I can't think of anything better than supporting work that honors her memory by helping other families." Joan's voice was firm. "You've been running yourself ragged trying to do everything. Let us help carry some of the load." The offer made Ethan's throat tight. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll take the help that's offered instead of insisting on carrying everything alone. That's what Sarah would tell you if she were here." So Ethan said yes, and over the following weeks, the additional support created breathing room he hadn't realized he desperately needed. He reduced his hospital shifts from 5 to 4 per week, using the extra day for task force work and policy consultation. The financial stability allowed him to accept speaking engagements that didn't pay but reached important audiences. Most significantly, it gave him more time with Lily, more presence in her daily life. Summer arrived with its particular magic: school letting out, long evenings, the promise of beach trips and lazy mornings. Ethan had promised Lily a week at the ocean, the vacation they'd been dreaming about since her nightmare back in those dark days of potential job loss. They left on a Saturday morning, the car packed with beach toys and sunscreen and the kind of hopeful anticipation that only vacations can bring. The drive took 5 hours, Lily alternating between excited chatter and comfortable silence, Ethan feeling something ease in his chest with each mile that took them away from routine and responsibility. The rental cottage was small and perfect, weathered shingles and a porch that faced the ocean. They spent the afternoon on the beach, Lily shrieking with delight as waves chased her up the sand, Ethan watching with the particular contentment of a parent seeing their child purely, completely happy. That evening, after a dinner of fish and chips eaten on the porch while sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, Lily fell asleep early, exhausted by sun and salt water. Ethan sat alone on the porch, listening to the ocean's rhythm, feeling Sarah's absence and presence in equal measure. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Board meeting today approved the family medical leave expansion. 20 hospitals in the region are adopting our model. Thought you'd want to know. 20 hospitals, hundreds of staff members, thousands of families who would benefit from policies that recognize their humanity. The number was staggering, the ripple effect of one stubborn refusal to sign a warning document extending far beyond anything Ethan could have imagined. He typed back, "That's incredible. Thank you for making it happen." Margaret's response came quickly. "Thank you for showing me why it mattered. Enjoy your vacation. You've earned it." The week at the beach unfolded in a blur of simple pleasures, sandcastles and ice cream, boogie boarding and shell collecting, long conversations and comfortable silences. Ethan taught Lily to read the ocean, to respect its power while enjoying its gifts. They talked about Sarah, sharing memories without the sharp edge of fresh grief, celebrating her life instead of only mourning her death. One evening, walking along the shore as the sun set, Lily asked, "Daddy, if you could tell Mommy one thing about our life now, what would you say?" Ethan thought about it, watching pelicans skim the water's surface. "I'd tell her we're okay, that we miss her every day, but we're building a good life, that you're growing into an amazing person, that I'm doing work that matters, that we found our way through the hardest thing and came out stronger. I'd tell her about your award," Lily added, "and about how you helped Ms. Margaret become nicer, and about Emma and the hospital family day. I'd want her to know all the good things." She'd love that. She always looked for the good things. They walked in silence for a while, the ocean whispering its eternal song, the sky transforming from blue to purple to star-studded black. This was healing, Ethan realized, not forgetting, not moving on, but integrating loss into life, carrying Sarah with them as they moved forward. The week ended too quickly, as all good things do. They drove home on Saturday with sand still in the car and Lily's face sun-kissed and peaceful. Back to reality, back to routine, but somehow different, refreshed, reconnected, ready. The fall brought new developments. The Regional Task Force published their comprehensive policy recommendations, endorsed by major healthcare organizations. Ethan was invited to testify before the state legislature on healthcare worker retention, bringing Lily with him because the hearing fell on a school holiday and because her presence illustrated his points more powerfully than any statistics could. Standing in the legislative chamber, Lily sitting in the front row with Joan, Ethan spoke about the personal cost of policies that forced impossible choices. He described Sarah's death, Lily's nightmares, his own near termination. But he also described transformation, Margaret's change of heart, Mercy General's cultural shift, the measurable improvements in both staff satisfaction and patient outcomes. Healthcare depends on people who care, Ethan concluded. But we can't ask people to care for others while ignoring their own families. We can't demand compassion from workers we treat without compassion. The policies we're recommending aren't radical or expensive. They're simply humane, and they work. The legislation passed 3 months later, mandating minimum standards for family leave and caregiver support across all hospitals receiving state funding. It wasn't perfect, wasn't everything the task force had hoped for, but it was real progress, concrete change that would affect real lives. On the day the governor signed the bill, Ethan received calls from colleagues across the state, texts from nurses he'd never met, emails from grateful families. The documentary aired nationally, reaching audiences far beyond the healthcare industry, sparking conversations about work-life balance and institutional compassion. Through it all, Ethan maintained his 4-day hospital schedule, keeping one foot firmly planted in bedside nursing. The policy work mattered, but so did the direct patient care, the relationships with frightened children and worried parents, the daily practice of the compassion he advocated for systemically. Winter returned, the year coming full circle. On a cold December evening, Ethan arrived home from a shift to find Lily at the kitchen table writing something with intense concentration. She looked up when he entered, her expression serious. "We have to write about our hero for school, someone who changed our life or made a difference or whatever. I'm writing about you." Ethan's throat went tight. "Sweetheart, I'm not a hero. I'm just your dad." "That's why you're my hero." Lily's logic was unassailable. "You lost Mommy, but you didn't give up. You worked hard and took care of me and fought for what was right, even when it was scary. And then you helped lots of other people too. That's hero stuff. Can I read it?" She handed over the paper covered in her careful cursive. Ethan read about himself through his daughter's eyes. The father who always came when she called, who balanced work and home, who'd stood up to unfairness, who'd shown her that being scared and being brave could happen simultaneously. The description was both accurate and impossibly generous, seeing him more clearly than he saw himself. "This is beautiful, Lily. I'm honored. It's true. You're the best dad anyone could have." She paused, then added quietly, "I think Mommy would say so too." The next day, Mercy General held its annual holiday celebration. The pediatric wing had been transformed with decorations and lights, current patients well enough to participate joining staff families for an afternoon of festivities. Margaret had organized the event with her characteristic attention to detail, but the spirit of it was pure joy. People who'd learned to be whole bringing their wholeness to work. Ethan found himself surrounded by the community that had grown from conflict and courage, colleagues who no longer hid their families, parents whose children knew where they worked, administrators who'd learned that supporting staff well-being was good business as well as good ethics. Emma was there with her family, her asthma well-controlled now, her friendship with Lily deepened by time and shared experience. Tyler, the 5-year-old who'd been terrified of IVs, stopped by with his parents to show off his perfectly healed arm. Sophie, who'd had the broken bone Lily had comforted, brought cookies she'd decorated herself. "For Nurse Ethan and Lily," she announced proudly, "because you made me not scared." Margaret approached with her mother Patricia, who was walking unassisted now, her recovery complete. "Can you believe it's been a year since everything changed?" Margaret asked. "It doesn't feel like a year, feels like both longer and shorter simultaneously." Ethan watched Lily playing with a group of children, her laughter bright and uninhibited. "But we're in a better place." "We are. And I wanted to tell you, I've been asked to present on our policy model at the National Healthcare Administration Conference. They want you to co-present. Talk about the frontline experience while I discuss implementation." "When?" "March. 3-day conference, all expenses paid. They specifically requested both perspectives, administrative and clinical. Will you do it?" Ethan thought about it. The time commitment, the travel, the continued expansion of work that wasn't strictly nursing but mattered deeply. "Yes, but I need to bring Lily. School spring break is that week, and I'm not missing it." "Bring her. The conference hotel has childcare during sessions, and honestly, having her there reinforces the whole point." Margaret smiled. "We're not hiding our families anymore, remember?" The celebration continued around them, music and laughter filling the pediatric wing that had been the epicenter of transformation. Ethan felt Sarah's presence strongly, not as grief but as gratitude, for the life they'd built, for the daughter they'd created, for the love that persisted beyond death. Joan found him near the refreshment table, her expression knowing. "You're thinking about Sarah." "Always. But differently now. Not just missing her, though I do, but also feeling thankful. She gave me Lily. She showed me what mattered. Even dying, she taught me something important, that love doesn't end, it just changes form. She'd be so proud of everything you've accomplished, both of you." Joan watched Lily with obvious affection. "That little girl is going to change the world someday. She's already learned from the master." "I'm hardly a master, just stubborn. Stubborn enough to refuse to choose between being a father and being a nurse. Stubborn enough to insist on your own humanity. That's exactly the kind of stubborn the world needs more of." As evening approached and the celebration wound down, families departing with full hearts and tired children, Ethan gathered Lily for the drive home. She chattered about the party, the friends she'd seen, the cookie decorating contest she'd won. "This was the best day," she declared. "Well, Maybe not the absolute best. The beach was pretty great, but definitely top 5. Top 5 is pretty good. Ethan navigated the familiar route home, streetlights flickering on as darkness settled. What made it so special? Everyone was happy, like really happy, not pretend happy. And it's because of you, Daddy. You made people's jobs better so they could be happier. I helped, but lots of people made it happen. You started it, though. Ms. Margaret said so in her speech at your award thing. She said you showed everyone a better way. Lily was quiet for a moment, then added, I want to be like you when I grow up. Someone who helps people and doesn't give up and makes things better. You already are like that, sweetheart. You don't have to wait to grow up. Home welcomed them with familiar warmth. They made hot chocolate and settled on the couch, Lily's head on Ethan's shoulder, the comfortable silence of people who'd weathered storms together and found peace on the other side. The months rolled forward into a new year, bringing continued growth and change. The national conference was a success, Ethan and Margaret's presentation receiving standing ovation and generating requests for consultation from hospitals across the country. Lily charmed conference attendees during the family reception, her articulate description of what it meant to have a parent who could be both present at work and present at home, moving several administrators to tears. Spring brought the documentary's Emmy nomination for Outstanding Short Documentary, validation that the story resonated far beyond healthcare circles. Summer brought another beach vacation, this one joined by Emma and her family, the friendship between the girls deepening into something that would last lifetimes. Through it all, Ethan maintained his center, 4 days a week at bedside, 1 day for policy work and advocacy, weekends for Lily and family, and the ordinary magic of their life together. He'd learned balance not by dividing himself, but by integrating his roles, letting each inform and strengthen the other. On a warm evening in late August, 2 years after the confrontation in Margaret's office that had started everything, Ethan sat on his apartment's small balcony watching the sunset. Lily was inside doing homework, Joan was visiting friends, and the world was quiet enough for reflection. His phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Ethan Brooks. Mr. Brooks, this is Chancellor Williams from the State Nursing Board. I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected as the state's Nurse of the Year. The award ceremony is in October. We'd be honored if you'd accept. Ethan sat in stunned silence for a moment. Nurse of the Year, statewide recognition. It felt surreal, impossible, far beyond anything he'd imagined when he'd simply refused to sign a warning document because it violated his integrity. I'm honored, he managed finally. Truly honored. Yes, I accept. Wonderful. We'll send details shortly. And Mr. Brooks, your advocacy work, your patient care excellence, your demonstration that healthcare workers can be whole people, it's transforming the profession. This recognition is well-deserved. After the call ended, Ethan sat with the news, letting it settle. 2 years ago, he'd faced termination. Now, state recognition. The reversal was dizzying, the validation profound. Lily appeared in the doorway. Who was that? The nursing board. They want to give me an award. Another one? You're collecting them. She grinned, then grew serious. You deserve it, though. You really do. Come here, Lilybug. Ethan pulled her into his lap despite her protests that she was too big. None of this, not the awards, not the policy changes, not any of it, would matter if I'd lost you in the process. You're the reason I fought. You're the reason any of this makes sense. I know. And you're the reason I'm not scared of hospitals or nurses or anything, really. You taught me how to be brave. They sat together as the sky darkened, father and daughter, their bond forged in loss and strengthened by love, watching day transition into night with the quiet confidence of people who'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the ruins. The award ceremony in October was elegant and moving. Ethan accepted the honor with Lily and Joan in the front row, with Margaret and his colleagues filling several tables, with representatives from the 20 hospitals that had adopted Mercy General's caregiver support model. His acceptance speech was brief but powerful, focusing not on his own achievements but on the systemic changes needed to support all healthcare workers. I stand here tonight representing thousands of nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers trying to balance impossible demands, he said. Single parents, caregivers, people with obligations beyond hospital walls. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for recognition that being fully human makes us better at caring for others. When institutions support our wholeness, everyone benefits. Staff, patients, families, communities. That's not revolutionary. It's just humane, and it works. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Afterward, strangers approached with stories of their own struggles and transformations, thanking him for giving voice to experiences they'd thought were theirs alone to bear. Late that night, back home after the ceremony, Ethan stood in Lily's doorway watching her sleep. The stuffed elephant was still there, joined now by Nurse Bear and a collection of other treasures accumulated over years of childhood. She was growing up, his daughter, becoming her own person, while still remaining fundamentally his Lilybug. The award plaque sat on the kitchen counter next to the Excellence in Pediatric Nursing recognition from the previous year. Physical manifestations of a journey that had started in crisis and led to transformation. But the real awards weren't made of crystal and engraving. They were moments. Lily's laughter, colleagues' gratitude, patients' trust, the daily practice of integrated living. Ethan's phone lit up with a final message for the evening from an unknown number. I'm a single father and nurse in Ohio. Saw your documentary and your award speech tonight. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm not failing at everything. Thank you for showing there's another way. He typed back carefully. You're not failing. You're surviving, which is harder and braver than most people realize. Keep fighting for your wholeness. It matters. Because it did matter. Every story, every struggle, every person trying to honor both their professional calling and their personal loves. They all mattered. And somehow, miraculously, Ethan's refusal to choose had created space for others to claim their own wholeness too. The following months brought continued growth, more hospitals adopting comprehensive caregiver support policies, more healthcare workers speaking openly about work-life balance, more institutional acknowledgement that compassion required compassionate treatment of caregivers themselves. The movement Ethan had accidentally sparked was becoming self-sustaining, growing beyond any one person's advocacy into genuine cultural shift. 3 years after the confrontation in Margaret's office, on a crisp spring morning, Ethan walked into Mercy General for a shift that felt both routine and miraculous. Routine because it was his work, his calling, the thing he was best at. Miraculous because he could do it without hiding who he was, without compartmentalizing his love for Lily, without pretending to be less than whole. The pediatric wing greeted him with familiar sounds and faces. New staff had joined who'd never known the old policies, who'd been hired into a culture that already valued wholeness. They moved through their work with an ease and openness that the older staff recognized as precious and hard-won. Margaret met him at the nurses' station with coffee and a smile. Their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to something larger than themselves. Big day, she said. The board's announcing expansion of the family leave policies to include mental health support and caregiver counseling, fully funded through hospital budget reallocation. You did that. We did that, Ethan corrected. All of us together. However it happened, it's beautiful to watch. Margaret sipped her coffee. My mother asked me to tell you she's volunteering at a senior center now, teaching other hip replacement recovery patients. She credits you with saving her life. Not just the surgical referral, but showing me how to be present for her. The ripples extended farther than Ethan could track, touching lives in ways he'd never fully know. That was the nature of systemic change. Individual actions creating collective transformation, one calm reply echoing through hallways and hospitals and policies until the whole system resonated differently. That afternoon, Ethan received an email from the task force. Their comprehensive policy recommendations had been adopted by the National Nurses Association and would be distributed to hospitals nationwide. Best practices born from one nurse's struggle would now potentially benefit hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers and their families. He forwarded the email to Joan with a simple message. Sarah would be proud. Her response came quickly. She is, and so am I. The evening shift change brought a moment Ethan had come to treasure. The brief overlap when day and night staff mingled, sharing updates and encouragement, a liminal space where the hospital's heartbeat was most visible. He completed his charting and prepared to head home, where Lily would be finishing homework and Joan would have dinner warming in the oven, where his life waited with all its ordinary, extraordinary beauty.
Walking to his car through the golden light of late afternoon, Ethan paused to look back at Mercy General. The building was unchanged, but everything it represented had transformed. What had once been a place of threatened termination was now a model of compassionate institutional culture. What had once demanded he choose was now celebrating his wholeness. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Don't forget we're making cookies tonight. I already got the chocolate chips ready."
Ethan smiled, typing back, "On my way home now. Can't wait." The drive home took him through familiar neighborhoods, past parks where children played and families walked together, through the ordinary landscape of lives being lived. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. Sarah's death, Lily's nightmares, the written warning, the confrontation, Margaret's transformation, the ripples of change extending outward in ways he still couldn't fully comprehend. What had started as one man's desperate stand for his right to be both father and nurse had become something larger. A movement, a cultural shift, proof that individuals speaking their truth could bend institutions toward justice. Not easily, not without cost, but genuinely, meaningfully, permanently. At home, Lily met him at the door with her usual enthusiasm, chocolate chips already in hand and flour somehow already on her nose. Joan was setting up the kitchen for their baking session, and the apartment smelled like home, warmth and love, and the particular peace that came from building a good life from broken pieces. They made cookies together, the three of them, mixing and measuring and laughing at Lily's creative interpretations of the recipe. Flour-dusted surfaces and chocolate chips disappeared into small mouths before they made it to the dough, and it was perfect, messy and joyful, and exactly right. Later, after Joan had gone home and Lily was showered and pajama-clad, they settled on the couch with milk and warm cookies, a ritual that had sustained them through hard times and now graced their better days. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was thoughtful. "I was thinking about my hero essay from school, the one about you." "What about it?" "I want to add something about how you showed me that good things can come from bad things. Like, Mommy dying was the worst thing ever. But it taught us to be brave and love each other extra hard. And you almost losing your job was scary, but it helped lots of people. Bad things happened, but we made good things from them." Ethan pulled her close, his heart almost too full for words. "That's very wise, sweetheart, and very true. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control what we do with it. That's what you did. You took something bad and made it better for everyone." She paused, considering. "I want to do that too when I grow up. Take hard things and make them into good things." "You already do that, Lily. Every day you take missing your mom and turn it into compassion for other people. That's alchemy, transforming pain into purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, cookies disappearing, milk glasses emptying, the evening settling into the particular piece of their life together. Outside, the world continued its turning, hospitals running their shifts, families navigating their challenges, systems slowly, grudgingly bending toward more humane configurations. But inside this apartment, in this moment, there was simply a father and daughter who'd survived loss and found not just survival but thriving, who'd fought for wholeness and won, who'd discovered that love, fierce and unapologizing, could be both foundation and force for transformation. Ethan tucked Lily into bed that night with the familiar rituals, story time, prayers or wishes depending on her mood, the careful arrangement of stuffed animals, the nightlight casting its gentle glow. "I love you, Lilybug, more than all the stars in the sky. I love you more than all the cookies in the world, which is a lot because I really love cookies." "That is a lot," Ethan agreed solemnly. "Sleep well. I'll see you in the morning." "Will you check on me during the night, like you always do?" "Always. I'm never more than a few steps away." "I know. That's why I can sleep without being scared." The words settled over Ethan like a benediction. This was what he'd fought for, not awards or recognition or policy changes, though those mattered. But this, his daughter sleeping peacefully, secure in his presence, unafraid of the dark because she knew her father stood watch. Ethan returned to the living room, to the quiet of evening, and allowed himself to feel the fullness of what they'd built. A life that honored Sarah's memory by being lived fully and well. A career that integrated rather than compartmentalized. a daughter growing strong and brave and compassionate. The phone buzzed one final time. Margaret sending a photo from the board meeting where the new mental health support policies had been approved. The caption read, "Look what we built. Thank you for refusing to give up." Ethan saved the photo, then set his phone aside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new balances to strike, new opportunities to demonstrate that wholeness and professionalism were complementary rather than contradictory. But tonight, there was just this: peace, gratitude, the profound satisfaction of having fought for something that mattered and won. Standing at his window, looking out at the neighborhood where he'd rebuilt his life, Ethan thought about the journey. From Sarah's deathbed promise to Margaret's office confrontation to this moment of hard-won peace. Every step had been necessary. Every struggle had taught him something essential. Every moment of standing firm in his truth had bent the world incrementally toward justice. And tomorrow, he would wake up and do it all again. Be a father, be a nurse, be a whole human being refusing to fragment for institutional convenience. He would show up for Lily, for his patients, for the colleagues who depended on the culture he'd helped create. He would continue this work of transformation, one shift at a time, one relationship at a time, one calm reply at a time. Because that was what changed the world. Not grand gestures or sweeping proclamations, but ordinary people standing firm in their integrity, refusing to accept that love was a liability, insisting on their right to be whole. One person, one moment, one choice at a time, until the accumulated weight of individual courage became institutional change. Ethan closed the curtains and turned off the lights, checking on Lily one final time before going to his own bed. She slept peacefully, her breathing steady and calm, living proof that fighting for what mattered was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. And as sleep claimed him, Ethan felt Sarah's presence one last time, not haunting, not demanding, but blessing. Proud of what he'd built, grateful for how he'd kept his promise, present in the love that continued to shape their daughter's life. The story that had started with a threat ended with transformation. The fight that had begun in isolation rippled outward to touch thousands of lives. And one calm reply, one refusal to choose between being a father and being a nurse, had indeed changed everything. Not just for Ethan Brooks and his daughter Lily, but for everyone who came after, everyone who watched, everyone who learned that wholeness was worth fighting for, and that sometimes, miraculously, courage was rewarded with grace. The hospital would open tomorrow with policies that honored its workers' humanity. Families across the region would navigate work and caregiving with support instead of judgment. And one nurse would wake up and go to work, carrying his daughter's love and his late wife's legacy, showing by simple existence that being fully human made him better at everything he did. This was the victory, not awards or recognition, but the daily practice of integrated living, the quiet revolution of refusing to fragment, the sustained insistence that love strengthened rather than weakened professional capability. And it had all started with one man, one choice, one moment of standing firm when it would have been easier to surrender. One calm reply that changed everything, forever.